Aion, the god of eternity. Picture this: a serpent, ancient beyond reckoning, coils itself into a perfect circle. Its scales shimmer with the light of distant stars, each one marking a moment in the endless procession of existence. The creature's jaws open wide, and slowly, deliberately, it begins to consume its own tail. This is no act of self-destruction. This is eternity devouring itself only to be reborn in the same breath. This is the Ouroboros, and it is the most perfect symbol we have for a deity most people have never heard of, a god who doesn't stride across battlefields or hurl thunderbolts from mountaintops, but who exists in every single second that has ever been and ever will be. His name is Aion, and he is time itself, not the time that ticks away on your phone or ages your body, but something far stranger, far more profound. While other gods in the Greek pantheon fought wars and had love affairs, Aion simply was. He represented the wheel of existence that turns forever, the cosmic breath that draws in and expels whole universes, the eternal return where every ending is secretly a beginning. Tonight, we're diving deep into the mysteries of one of the most enigmatic and philosophically rich deities in ancient Mediterranean religion. We're going to explore a god who confused even the ancients themselves, who was depicted as both a radiant youth and an aged patriarch, who held the keys to the celestial gates and stood at the boundary between time and timelessness. We're going to uncover the rituals performed in his honor in the underground temples of mystery cults, decode the strange artwork that shows him standing naked within the Zodiac wheel, and investigate why this obscure deity became so important that Roman emperors put his image on their coins as a guarantee of eternal rule. But first, we need to understand what makes Aion different from every other god of time you might have heard of. Because in the ancient world, not all time was created equal. The name Aion, sometimes spelled Aeon, comes from the ancient Greek word alphanu, which translates roughly as long period of time, lifetime, or age. But that simple translation doesn't capture the philosophical weight this word carried in the Hellenistic world. When ancient Greeks spoke of Aion, they weren't just talking about duration. They were pointing towards something that existed beyond the measurement of sundials and water clocks, something that philosophers spent entire careers trying to articulate. In the grand theater of Greek mythology, most deities had clear domains. Zeus commanded the sky and thunder. Poseidon ruled the seas. Hades governed the underworld. But Aion, his domain was more abstract, more cerebral. He didn't control time in the sense of making clocks run fast or slow. Instead, he embodied a specific kind of time, eternal, cyclic, unbounded time. The kind of time that doesn't have a beginning or an end, that loops back on itself like that serpent eating its tail. This immediately sets Aion apart from Chronos, another time deity in Greek mythology. Now, here's where things get confusing. And it confused the ancients too, because these two gods often got mixed up and conflated with each other, and later both got confused with the Titan Chronos, father of Zeus. Let me untangle this for you. Chronos, with an H, was the primordial god of time in Orphic cosmogony, depicted as a serpentine figure who emerged at the dawn of creation. He represented linear, empirical, chronological time, the kind that flows from past through present into future, never returning. Think of Chronos as the time that erodes mountains, that ages living things, that moves in one direction like an arrow. This is historical time, progressive time, the time of cause and effect. The Titan Chronos, sometimes spelled Chronos, was something else entirely. He was one of the 12 Titans, son of Uranus and Gaia, who castrated his father and ruled during the Golden Age before being overthrown by his son Zeus. His name sounds similar to Chronos, and by the classical period, The two had become theologically conflated. Father Time with his scythe, that's actually a blend of these two figures, not originally part of either one's mythology. But Aion represented something completely different. He was cyclic time, eternal time, ritual time, the time that doesn't progress but returns. Imagine time not as a line but as a circle, or better yet, as a wheel that spins forever. The season cycle. The zodiac rotates. Day becomes night, becomes day again. The year ends and begins anew. Life emerges from death, which feeds new life. This is Aion's domain, the eternal present that contains all moments, the perpetual now that never actually changes even as everything within it transforms. The philosopher Plato, writing in his dialogue Timaeus around 370 BCE, made a crucial distinction that helped define Aion for generations to come. The demiurge, the craftsman god who shaped the physical cosmos in Plato's Cosmology, created our sensible, physical world as a moving image of eternity. Plato wrote that the demiurge made Chronos, measurable time that moves and can be divided into past, present, and future, as an imitation of Aion, which is eternity itself, immovable, existing in an eternal present, without beginning or end. Think of it this way. Chronos is to Aion as a clock is to the concept of timelessness. The clock measures and marks, but timelessness simply is. Chronos is the ripples on the surface of a pond. Aion is the deep, still water beneath that never changes regardless of what happens on the surface. This philosophical understanding of Aion as ontological eternity, the very being and essence of time, not its measurement, made him incredibly important in the mystery religions and philosophical schools of the Hellenistic period. He wasn't just another god in the pantheon. He was a cosmic principle, a fundamental aspect of reality itself. In artistic representations from the Roman period, Aion appears most commonly as a beautiful young man, nude or nearly so, standing within or holding a large circular ring inscribed with the 12 signs of the Zodiac. The Zodiac wheel is crucial here because it represents the cycle of the celestial sphere, the eternal movement of the stars and planets that marks the passage of seasons and years in an endless loop. Aion stands at the center of this wheel, or sometimes within it, as the personification of the time that the Zodiac measures. Not individual moments, but the great cycles themselves. But here's where Aion gets really interesting. He doesn't always appear as a youth. In some depictions, he's an ancient, bearded man, representing the accumulated weight of all the ages he has witnessed. The poet Nonnus of Panopolis, writing in the 5th century CE, describes how Aion changes the burden of old age like a snake who sloughs off the coils of the useless old scales, rejuvenescing while washing in the swells of the laws of time. In other words, Aion can be both young and old because he is eternal. He ages and rejuvenates simultaneously, forever cycling between these states. This dual nature, young and old, beginning and end, makes Aion the perfect embodiment of cyclic time. He is the year that ends in winter's death and begins again in spring's rebirth. He is the day that dies into night and resurrects at dawn. He is every cycle, every return, every eternal recurrence. And coiled around most depictions of Aion, a serpent. Sometimes it's wrapped around his body in spirals. Sometimes it forms a circle around the zodiac wheel. And yes, sometimes it's explicitly shown as an Ouroboros, the tail-devouring serpent that symbolizes the cosmos consuming and regenerating itself infinitely. This serpent isn't just decorative. It's essential to understanding what Aion represents. The serpent sheds its skin and is renewed. It coils in circles. Its form suggests both infinity and the return to origins. The Ouroboros, in particular, has no beginning or end, just like eternal time itself. The philosopher and historian Plutarch, writing in the 1st century CE, distinguished between gods who exist in time and God who exists in Aion, in eternity. For Plutarch, Aion was an unmoving, non-temporal state. The supreme deity doesn't experience the past or future because those are divisions of Chronos, of linear time. The divine exists in eternal now, in Aion. This is heady, philosophical stuff, but it mattered deeply to ancient people trying to understand their place in the cosmos. If you worshipped Aion or participated in mysteries associated with him, you were engaging with questions about the nature of existence itself. Does time ever really pass? Or does it only seem to? Are we trapped in Chronos, always losing the present moment to an irretrievable past? Or can we somehow touch Aion, experience the eternal? These weren't abstract academic questions. They had real religious and spiritual implications. The mystery religions, secret initiatory cults that promise salvation, gnosis, and understanding of divine truth, incorporated Aion into their cosmologies and rituals. If you could understand Aion, if you could ritually participate in the eternal cycles he represented, perhaps you could escape the tyranny of linear time. Perhaps you could achieve immortality, not in the sense of living forever in Chronos, but by existing in Aion, in eternity itself. To truly grasp Aion's significance, we need to step back and examine how ancient Mediterranean peoples understood time itself. Because our modern, Western conception of time, this idea that we're moving from past through present toward future in a straight line, isn't universal or natural. It's cultural, learned, and relatively recent in human history. Most ancient cultures viewed time as fundamentally cyclic. The agricultural cycle was the most obvious example. Plant, grow, harvest, lie fallow, plant again. The seasons repeated in an unchanging pattern. The moon waxed and waxed again. The sun rose, traced its arc across the sky, set, and rose once more. Human life itself seemed to follow nature's pattern. Birth, growth, death, and then, as the generations renewed themselves, birth again. The cosmos appeared to move in great circles, not lines. The ancient Egyptians, for instance, conceived of time as Nihe and Jet, two different but complementary forms of eternity. Nihe was cyclic time, the eternal recurrence, the endless repetition of cosmic cycles. Jet was something closer to static eternity, the unchanging permanence of what always is. Both were necessary to understand the nature of existence. The Egyptians saw the daily journey of the sun god Ra as a cycle of death and rebirth, dying in the west, traveling through the underworld, and being reborn in the east, a pattern that repeated eternally without alteration. Indian philosophy developed the concept of kala, time, as operating in enormous cosmic cycles called yugas, massive ages that repeat in patterns. After the universe is destroyed, it's recreated, and the cycles begin again. Time folds back on itself. Everything that has happened will happen again, though perhaps with variations, in an eternal cosmic dance. The Greeks inherited and developed similar ideas. The Pythagoreans, influenced perhaps by Eastern philosophy, taught the doctrine of eternal recurrence, the idea that the universe follows fixed cycles and that every event that has occurred will occur again and again in exactly the same way in each cycle. They believe that at specific intervals, the cosmos returns to its initial configuration and begins the whole process over. You would live this exact life again, make all the same choices, experience all the same joys and sorrows infinitely. This is what the Stoic philosophers later called the doctrine of ekpyrosis and palingenesis, universal conflagration and rebirth. The Stoics believed that periodically, The universe would be consumed by cosmic fire and then regenerate itself exactly as it was before, embarking on another cosmic cycle identical to all the ones before and all the ones that will come after. Can you imagine the philosophical and psychological implications of believing in eternal recurrence? Every moment has happened before and will happen again. There is no true novelty, no ultimate progress, no final destination. Everything returns. This is, of course, the idea that Friedrich Nietzsche would famously revive in the 19th century as the eternal return, treating it as a thought experiment to test whether one truly affirmed life. If you had to live this exact life again and again forever, would you embrace it or recoil in horror? But the Greeks also developed the concept of Chronos, linear time, particularly as they became more historically minded. The Greek historians, Herodotus, Thucydides, were narrating events in sequence in a timeline that moved from past through present toward future. Historical consciousness is inherently linear. Cause leads to effect. Events happen once and don't repeat. This creates a tension in Greek thought between cyclic cosmic time and linear historical time. Christianity, emerging from Judaism and spreading through the Greek-speaking Roman world, would eventually tip the balance decisively toward linear time in Western thought. The Judeo-Christian conception of history is fundamentally linear: creation, fall, redemption, final judgment, eternal state. Things happen once. Christ dies once for all. There is a beginning, Genesis, and an end, Revelation. Time has a direction and a destination. This linear view of time would become dominant in Western culture, so dominant that many modern Westerners can hardly conceive of time any other way. But in the Hellenistic world where Aion emerged as a significant deity, both models coexisted in tension. Aion represented the cyclic model, eternal, repeating, circular time. He stood in contrast to Chronos, who represented linear, progressive time. And this wasn't just abstract philosophy. These different conceptions of time had profound implications for how people understood their lives. If you believe time is fundamentally cyclic, then nothing is ever truly lost. Death is not an end, but a transformation that leads back to life. The year dies in winter, but returns in spring. The golden age of Chronos may have ended, but perhaps it will come again. This is consoling in some ways. What passes will return, but also potentially fatalistic. If everything is cycles, can anything ever truly change? Are we just trapped on a wheel, spinning forever? If you believe time is linear, then each moment matters absolutely and uniquely. This moment will never come again. Your choices have irreversible consequences. There is progress, development, genuine novelty. But there is also permanent loss. What passes is gone forever. Death is a one-way door. This can be liberating. The future is open. Truly new things can happen, but also terrifying. There's no reset button, no return to a better time. Aion, as the personification of cyclic time, offered a way to think about eternity that was neither the nihilism of linear time's ultimate death nor the potential stagnation of mere repetition. He represented the eternal present, the now that contains all times, the cycle that is always complete, yet always continuing. To participate in Aion's mysteries was to step outside Chronos momentarily and touch the eternal. The zodiac circle that Aion holds or inhabits in his iconography is the perfect symbol of this cyclic time. The 12 signs of the zodiac march in an endless procession around the ecliptic, the sun's apparent path through the sky. Aries begins the cycle in spring. The signs progress through summer, autumn, winter, and then return to Aries again. The cycle is complete, yet never-ending. Each year repeats the pattern, yet each year is also unique in its particular manifestations. The zodiac is both eternal, always the same 12 signs in the same order, and temporal, marking the passage of specific years and seasons. Ancient astrology was not primarily about predicting individual fates or reading horoscopes in the modern sense. It was about understanding the cosmic order, the grand patterns that governed all existence. The movements of the planets through the zodiac were thought to influence earthly affairs not arbitrarily, but as part of a cosmic harmony, a great symphony where everything had its place and time. To understand the zodiac, to be able to read the celestial clock, was to understand the mind of the cosmos itself, to grasp the patterns of Aion's eternal cycles. In Mithraic art, we'll get deeper into Mithraism later. The zodiac will appears constantly. Mithraism was a mystery religion particularly popular among Roman soldiers, centered on the Persian god Mithras, who slays the cosmic bull in a cave surrounded by various symbolic figures. In many Mithraic temples, Aion appears as a prominent figure, often depicted with the zodiac encircling him or entwined with serpents, holding keys that presumably unlock the gates of heaven. The Mithraic cosmos was organized according to a complex astral theology where the soul descended from the realm of the fixed stars, the zodiac, through the planetary spheres, becoming increasingly material and forgetful of its divine origin. The initiate's goal was to reverse this journey, to ascend back through the spheres and exit through the gate beyond the zodiac, where Aion stood guard. To pass Aion was to escape time itself and enter eternity. This brings us to one of the most profound aspects of Aion's nature. He exists at the boundary between time and eternity, between the temporal cosmos and whatever lies beyond it. He is immanent in the cycles of the universe, present in every turning of the zodiac wheel, every seasonal change, every death and rebirth, but he is also transcendent, existing in an eternal present that encompasses all these cycles at once. He is on time, but not on time. He measures eternity not by moments, but by ages, by vast cosmic periods that themselves cycle and return. The Roman poet Virgil, in his famous fourth eclogue, writes of the return of the Golden Age and prophesies, "Now the last age of Cumean song approaches. A great order of ages is born anew. This is Aion's realm, the Magnus Ordo Seclorum, the great order of ages. Time doesn't just march forward, it completes great cycles, and at the completion of each cycle, the world is renewed." The word seculum, which we get secular from, originally meant an age or generation, specifically the longest possible length of a human life. It came to represent the longest period of time that could be conceived, a cosmic age. And in Roman imperial ideology, each new emperor inaugurated a new seculum, a new age of peace and prosperity guaranteed to last eternally, guaranteed by Aion himself. Understanding this distinction between cyclic and linear time, between Aion and Chronos, helps us grasp why Aion became so important in the religious and philosophical landscape of late antiquity. As the Roman Empire expanded and diverse cultures and religious traditions mixed together in the cosmopolitan cities of the Mediterranean, people were looking for ways to understand the cosmos that could accommodate different traditions and answer deep existential questions. Aion, as the personification of eternal, cyclic time, offered a way to think about divinity, fate, immortality, and the nature of reality that appealed across cultural boundaries. He wasn't a god you'd pray to for a good harvest or victory in battle, not in the straightforward way you might petition Zeus or Mars. Aion was more abstract, more philosophical, but that abstraction made him powerful in a different way. He was the god who could reconcile the eternal with the temporal, the one with the many, the unchanging with the ever-changing. He was, in philosophical terms, a way to think about the problem of the one and the many, permanence and change, fundamental questions that occupied the greatest thinkers of the ancient world. And he was the God who promised that nothing was ever truly lost because everything returns. In a world where mortality was always present, where empires rose and fell, where the certainty of death haunted every living moment, the promise of eternal return, of cycles that never end, held profound comfort and meaning. The word Aion appears far back in Greek literature, long before Aion became personified as a distinct deity. In the earliest Greek texts, the works of Homer and Hesiod in the 8th century BCE, Aion simply meant lifespan or life force. It was almost synonymous with life itself, the vital essence that animated a living being. When a hero died in the Iliad, his Aion left him. The word carried connotations of fate and destiny, often associated with Moira, the Greek word for one's allotted portion or fate. Homer uses Aion to describe the life that warriors risk in battle or that mourners lament when it's lost. "You have staked your Aion on this combat," one character might say to another, meaning you've risked your life, your very essence of living. There's no sense yet of Aion as cosmic time or eternity. It's personal, individual, mortal. Hesiod, writing around the same period, uses the term similarly. In his Theogony and Works and Days, Aion refers to human lifespan, to the time of living granted to mortals. The gods have endless Aion. They don't age or die, while humans receive only a brief portion before death claims them. The etymological root of Aion has been debated by scholars, but it seems to derive from an older Indo-European word related to vital force, life essence, or even marrow, the innermost, most essential part. This connects Aion to the very seed of life, the core animating principle. Over time, this meaning expanded and evolved, moving from individual lifespan to generational time, the length of a human generation, to age or epoch, a long period of time, and finally to eternity or timeless existence. This semantic evolution mirrors a philosophical development. As Greek thought became more abstract and metaphysical, words that once referred to concrete, physical realities began to take on philosophical, even mystical meanings. The same process happened with words like psyche, which originally meant breath or life, and came to mean soul, or logos, which meant word, but evolved to signify reason, principle, or divine word. The transition of Aion from lifespan to eternity reflects an intellectual journey from the particular to the universal, from the mortal to the immortal. By the classical period, the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, we start seeing Aion used by playwrights and philosophers to mean much longer stretches of time than an individual life. The playwright Aeschylus uses Aion to describe lifelong duration for humans, but unending time for gods. Plato, as I mentioned earlier, is crucial in this evolution. When he describes the demiurge creating Chronos as a moving image of Aion in the Timaeus, he's using Aion to mean something like eternity or timeless being. This Platonic usage would become hugely influential. After Plato, Aion increasingly meant not just a very long time, but timeless eternity, the unchanging eternal present that stands in contrast to the flux of temporal existence. Aristotle, Plato's student, developed his own interpretation. For Aristotle, Aion referred to the complete period of each being's existence, the totality of its life. For mortals, that's a finite period. For the heavens and the divine, Aion is endless, perpetual. Aristotle called the endless life of the cosmos and the divine Aion because they exist in continuous, unbroken duration, even if not in a strictly timeless sense like Plato meant. Philo of Alexandria, the Jewish philosopher writing at the turn of the Common Era, synthesized Greek philosophy with Jewish theology. For Philo, Aion is the life of God, eternal, unbounded, perfect. God exists in Aion, while creation exists in Chronos. The created world experiences change and temporal succession, but God is immutable, eternal, existing in an eternal present. Philo's interpretation would influence early Christian theology, where similar distinctions appear between temporal creation and eternal creator. The Stoic philosophers had their own take. For the Stoics, Aion referred to the totality of time, the complete lifespan of the cosmos from its generation in one cosmic cycle to its destruction in ekpyrosis and regeneration in the next cycle. One Aion is the complete cycle of the universe from beginning to end, after which a new, identical Aion begins. This is cyclic time on the grandest scale, not just years or generations, but complete world cycles. In magical papyri from Egypt, dating from the first few centuries CE, Aion appears frequently as a divine name or title. In these texts, collections of spells, invocations, and magical instructions used by practitioners of Greco-Egyptian magic. Aion is invoked as a supreme cosmic deity, often identified or associated with the sun god Helios. He's called Cosmocrator, ruler of the cosmos, and Pantocrator, all-powerful. The magical papyri show Aion as a personal god who can be petitioned, bargained with, invoked for power and knowledge, while still retaining his cosmic, eternal nature. I call upon you, the great God, eternal and unbounded, invisible and self-generated, above whom there is no one, reads one invocation from the Greek magical papyri. Hither to me, King, I call you God of gods, might, boundless, undefiled, indescribably, firmly established Aion. These invocations present Aion as the supreme deity, the ultimate source, eternal and transcendent, yet accessible through ritual and magic. This usage shows how Aion had evolved from a common noun meaning lifespan to a proper name for a god, and not just any god, but in some contexts the supreme god, the cosmic principle behind all existence. This theological elevation happened gradually across the Hellenistic period as various philosophical schools, religious movements, and magical traditions synthesized, borrowing from each other and creating new interpretations. The Roman poet Virgil, writing in the 1st century BCE, used the term saeculum, the Latin equivalent of Aion, meaning an age or generation, in ways that carry similar cosmic weight. The Romans had a religious ceremony called the Ludi Seculares, the secular games, performed once every saeculum, calculated variously, but roughly every 100 to 110 years, to mark the transition from one age to another and to inaugurate a new era. These games involved elaborate rituals, sacrifices, and invocations to ensure the prosperity and renewal of Rome for another saeculum. Augustus, the first Roman emperor, celebrated the secular games in 17 BCE with great pomp, commissioning Virgil's contemporary, the poet Horace, to write the Carmen Seculaire, a hymn for the occasion. The ceremony symbolically ended one age and began another, Augustus's new golden age of peace and prosperity after decades of civil war. This is saeculum/Aion as more than just a time period. It's a cosmic era with its own character and destiny, inaugurated and guaranteed by divine power. When Aion later appears as a personified deity on Roman coins and monuments, he carries this weight of meaning. He's not just time, in an abstract sense, but the guarantor of the eternal Roman Empire, the divine principle ensuring that Rome's saeculum will never end, that its golden age is eternal, or at least will cycle back eternally after any period of decline. The earliest unambiguous depictions of Aion as a distinct, personified deity date from the Hellenistic period, roughly the 3rd century BCE onward. These show up in art and inscriptions, where Aion appears with his characteristic symbols. The Zodiac wheel, the serpent, sometimes wings, often in the company of earth goddesses like Cybele or Tellus, who represent the material world while he represents the temporal or eternal dimension. A crucial piece of evidence comes from Eleusis, the site of the famous Eleusinian mysteries dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. An inscription there, dating to the reign of Augustus, records that 3 Roman brothers dedicated a statue of Aion for the might of Rome and the persistence of the mysteries. This links Aion explicitly to the mystery religions, those secret initiatory cults that promised esoteric knowledge and personal salvation. The mysteries of Eleusis concern death, rebirth, and the promise of a blessed afterlife. Aion, as eternal cyclic time, fits perfectly into this theology. Death is not an end, but a transition in an eternal cycle. Mystery religions in general, whether Eleusinian, Orphic, Dionysian, or Mithraic, emphasize that surface reality, the world of change and mortality, was not ultimate reality. Behind the flux of temporal existence lay eternal patterns, divine truths, cosmic orders that the initiate could come to understand and participate in. Aion represented these eternal patterns. To grasp Aion was to grasp the key to existence itself, to understand that you were not merely a mortal body living and dying in linear time, but an eternal soul participating in cosmic cycles. The word Aion also appears in Jewish texts translated into Greek and in the New Testament, where it's typically translated as age, world, or sometimes eternity. Phrases like the age to come, or forever and ever, literally, unto the ages of ages, use forms of Aion. Early Christian theology inherited and transformed Greek philosophical concepts, including this complex understanding of Aion as both temporal age and timeless eternity. Christian writers distinguish between this age, the present fallen world, and the age to come, the redeemed eternal state after Christ's return. They also speak of God as existing before the ages and unto all ages, that is, eternally, outside temporal succession. This multilayered usage, Aion as lifespan, as age, as eternity, as divine name, demonstrates the word's conceptual richness and flexibility. And this flexibility is key to understanding why Aion could be incorporated into so many different religious and philosophical systems in late antiquity. He could mean slightly different things to different groups while still maintaining a core identity as the principle or personification of eternal time, cyclic ages, and boundless duration. By the time we get to the first few centuries CE, when Aion appears most prominently in art, inscriptions, and religious texts, he's become a theological Swiss Army knife, a deity complex enough to satisfy philosophical monotheists looking for a supreme cosmic principle, concrete enough to offer mystery initiates a divine being to contemplate and commune with, and flexible enough to be identified with various other gods in the syncretic atmosphere of the late Roman Empire. But to truly understand how Aion functioned in ancient religious imagination, we need to look at the cosmogonies, the creation myths, where he appears. And that means diving into the strange, mystical world of Orphic religion. The Orphic tradition represents one of the most fascinating and mystical strands of ancient Greek religion. Named after Orpheus, the legendary musician and poet who descended to the underworld to retrieve his dead wife Eurydice, Orpheism was a collection of religious beliefs, practices, texts, and initiatory rites that existed alongside mainstream Greek religion but offered a more mystical, more dualistic, and more salvation-oriented theology. Unlike the civic religion of the Greek city-states, which centered on communal festivals and sacrifices to the Olympian gods, Orpheism was concerned with the fate of the individual soul, with personal purification, with escaping the cycle of reincarnation, and with achieving union with the divine. Orphic beliefs influenced Pythagoreanism, Platonism, and eventually early Christianity. And Orphic cosmogony, their creation myth, places beings closely related to Aion at the very beginning of all things. The Orphic creation story exists in several versions, preserved fragmentarily in quotations by later writers. Unlike Homer and Hesiod's relatively straightforward creation accounts, Orphic cosmogony is weird, abstract, and heavily symbolic. It goes something like this. In the beginning, or rather, before beginning, since time itself doesn't exist yet, there is formless chaos. From chaos emerges Chronos, primordial time, but this isn't time as we know it. Orphic Chronos is described as an unaging, serpentine being, incorporeal yet powerful, existing before the created cosmos. Some accounts give him 3 heads, a man, a bull, and a lion, representing different aspects of time or different stages of cosmic development. Chronos has a consort, Ananke, meaning necessity or inevitability. Ananke is also serpentine, also primordial. Together, Chronos and Ananke coil around the cosmic egg that will become the universe. The egg contains all potentiality, all future existence, compressed into perfect unity before differentiation. Through the action of Chronos and Ananke, through time and necessity, the cosmic egg cracks open, and from it emerges fans, also called protogonos, the firstborn, erikapeos, the giver of life, and significantly for our purposes, sometimes identified with Aion. Fans is the first god, the primordial deity from whom all others descend. He's described as a hermaphroditic being, both male and female, containing all generative powers within himself. He has golden wings and multiple faces or heads facing in all directions, able to see all of time and space simultaneously. Fans is radiant, shining, the illuminator. He is the firstborn light in the darkness of pre-cosmic chaos. And critically, he represents the transition from undifferentiated potentiality to actualized existence, from eternity to time, from unity to multiplicity. In some Orphic accounts, Fans is explicitly called Aion. The identification makes sense. If Aion represents the totality of time, the sum of all ages, then at the moment of creation, when time begins, Aion and the first created being would be one and the same. Fans Aion emerges from timeless chaos into the first moment of time, and in doing so, creates the conditions for all subsequent existence. This is mind-bending theology. We're dealing with the paradox of how time itself begins. If there's a before and after, doesn't that imply time already exists? The Orphics resolve this by making Chronos primordial. He exists in the pre-cosmic state, and Fans Aion the first being of created time. Chronos is time as an abstract principle. Fans Aion is time as actualized existence, as the living cosmos that unfolds in temporal cycles. The Derveni papyrus, discovered in 1962 in northern Greece and dating to around 340 BCE, contains the oldest surviving manuscript of Greek literature in Europe and includes an Orphic cosmogony with commentary. The papyrus is fragmentary and sometimes difficult to interpret, but it clearly deals with these primordial figures and their relationships. The commentator interprets the Orphic poems allegorically, treating them as encoding philosophical truths about the nature of reality. According to this and other sources, after Fans creates the gods and sets the cosmos in motion, he eventually transfers sovereignty to Night, who in turn transfers it to Uranus, Sky, who transfers it to Cronus, who transfers it to Zeus. Zeus, wanting to recreate the universe, swallows fans, consumes the first god, takes all existence back into himself, and then brings forth a new creation. This is the generation of the Olympian gods and the world as we know it. But here's the key. Fans doesn't cease to exist when swallowed by Zeus. Instead, he becomes part of Zeus, or Zeus becomes a manifestation of fans. The first and the latest merge. Beginning and end unite. The Orphic hymn to Zeus proclaims, Zeus is first, Zeus is last, Zeus is head, Zeus is middle. From Zeus all things have their foundation. Zeus is male, Zeus is female. Zeus is the foundation of earth and starry heaven. There is one power, one demon, one supreme ruler of all things. This monistic theology, all gods are ultimately one God. All existence is ultimately one existence, is thoroughly Orphic and deeply philosophical, and fans Aion as the first emanation of divine unity into cosmic multiplicity, represents the key to understanding this system. He is the hinge between eternity and time, between the one and the many, between the transcendent divine and the immanent cosmos. The serpentine nature of both Chronos and fans Aion is symbolically rich. Serpents shed their skin and are renewed, making them perfect symbols of cyclic regeneration. Their ability to coil in circles evokes the Ouroboros and the Zodiac wheel. Serpents are liminal creatures, able to move between earth, water, and trees, symbolizing their ability to traverse different realms of existence. In many ancient cultures, serpents represent wisdom, transformation, and eternity. The specific image of the three-headed Chronos, man, bull, lion, requires interpretation. These animals appear throughout ancient religious symbolism. The lion often represents solar power, kingship, and raw strength. The bull represents generative force, fertility, earthly power. The man represents intelligence, consciousness, and rational ordering. Together, they might symbolize the threefold nature of time: rational/intellectual time, man, natural/generative time, bull, and sovereign/consuming time, lion. Or they might represent time's dominion over all realms: human civilization, animal nature, and wild power. In Mithraic iconography, which we'll examine more deeply later, a figure with a lion's head and a serpent coiled around his body appears prominently. This leontocephaline, lion-headed, figure is often identified as Aion or Chronos, standing within the Zodiac wheel, holding keys, with the heads of a ram and goat protruding from his body. The symbolism is dense. The lion represents solar power and temporal authority. The serpent represents eternity and cycles. The ram and goat likely represent equinoxes or solstices, the turning points of the solar year. The keys represent control over the gates of heaven and the gates of the spheres through which the soul must pass. Whether this Mithraic figure is truly Aion or Chronos, or some syncretic fusion of both with other deities, remains debated by scholars. But the imagery clearly draws from the same symbolic vocabulary we see in Orphic cosmogony. Time is a powerful, polymorphic, serpentine principle that governs the cosmos and stands at the threshold between temporal and eternal existence. The Orphic creation myth, with its strange primordial gods and abstract cosmic principles, might seem wildly different from the familiar Olympian mythology of Zeus, Hera, Athena, and the rest. And it is different. Orpheism was never a mainstream Greek religion. It was esoteric, initiatory, mystical, but it was influential far beyond its actual number of adherents. Orphic ideas seeped into philosophy, particularly Pythagoreanism and Platonism. They influenced how educated Greeks and Romans thought about the soul, about cosmology, about the relationship between unity and multiplicity. And at the heart of Orphic cosmogony stands this figure, called Chronos or Fans or Aion depending on the text and interpretation, who represents the birth of time, the emergence of existence from non-existence, the first differentiation that makes creation possible. This god is both young, newly born from the cosmic egg, and ancient, existing before creation in some form. He is radiant and dark, singular and multiple, eternal and temporal. Understanding this mythological background helps us see why Aion, when he appears in Roman art and religion centuries later, carries such symbolic weight. He's not just one more god in an already crowded pantheon. He's the principle of cosmic order itself, the governor of ages, the personification of the eternal cycles within which all other gods and all mortal beings exist. Now let's examine how Aion was actually depicted in ancient art, because the visual representations tell us a tremendous amount about how he was understood and worshipped. Unlike gods like Zeus or Athena who have consistent iconographies across centuries, Aion's appearance varies significantly, reflecting his complex and multifaceted nature. The most common representation shows Aion as a naked or semi-draped young man standing within or beside a large zodiac circle. The nakedness is significant. It represents purity, divine nature, freedom from material constraint. Gods and heroes in Greek art are frequently nude, signifying their transcendence of human modesty and shame, their perfection of form, their status as idealized beings rather than ordinary mortals. The zodiac circle is Aion's primary attribute, his defining symbol. In these depictions, the zodiac wheel is usually large enough to surround his body or form a halo-like circle behind him, with the 12 signs carefully delineated around its circumference. Aries the ram, Taurus the bull, Gemini the twins, Cancer the crab, Leo the lion, Virgo the virgin, Libra the scales, Scorpio the scorpion, Sagittarius the archer, Capricorn the goat, Aquarius the water bearer, Pisces the fishes, all marching in their eternal procession. Sometimes Aion holds the zodiac circle in his hands, displaying it like a cosmic wheel that he controls. Other times he stands within it, suggesting that he is both separate from and inseparable from cosmic time, both the center around which it revolves and part of the revolution itself. This visual ambiguity, is he inside or outside the zodiac, perfectly captures his liminal nature as the boundary between time and eternity. In many depictions, a serpent coils around Aion's body or around the zodiac wheel. Sometimes it's a single serpent spiraling upward from his feet to his head or circling the wheel's perimeter. Sometimes it's clearly an Ouroboros, tail and mouth, forming a perfect circle that emphasizes the cyclic nature of time. The serpent isn't menacing in these images. It's part of Aion's divine nature, an essential aspect of his identity. The Ouroboros deserves special attention because it's one of the most powerful and ancient symbols in human culture, appearing in Egyptian, Greek, Norse, Hindu, and many other traditions. The serpent eating its own tail creates a closed loop with no beginning or end, the perfect symbol for eternity. But it's more than just a circle. It's a circle that sustains itself through self-consumption and self-generation. The Ouroboros doesn't merely exist eternally. It actively creates its own eternity through continuous destruction and recreation. This is precisely Aion's nature. He isn't static eternity, frozen and unchanging. He's dynamic eternity, eternal process, the continuous cycling of death and rebirth. The Ouroboros doesn't represent the absence of change, but change that ultimately changes nothing. The fundamental pattern that remains constant even as its contents transform. Winter devours autumn, but in devouring it, winter gives birth to spring. The year consumes itself and is reborn. The Ouroboros is a time of eternal return. In some Roman mosaics and frescoes, Aion appears as an aged, bearded man rather than a youth. These depictions show him with long white hair and beard, sometimes bent with apparent age, yet still vigorous and commanding. This version of Aion represents the accumulated weight of eons, the ancient one who has witnessed all ages. But remember, Aion can be both young and old simultaneously because he exists at all times. Some artistic traditions show him with one young face and one old face, or transitioning from youth to age, visually representing his dual temporal nature. The poet Nonnus describes this transformation explicitly. Aion rejuvenates like a serpent shedding its skin, becoming young again after bearing the burden of ages. This isn't metaphorical. In the logic of cyclic time, old age leads back to youth just as the end of the year leads back to the beginning. The decrepit old man of December is reborn as the infant new year of January. Aion, containing all these moments, is simultaneously aged and renewed. In Mithraic contexts, Aion appears with additional symbols. He may hold keys, usually two crossed keys, representing his control over the gates of heaven. These keys grant or deny access to the celestial realm beyond the Zodiac, the region of eternal fixed stars where the soul can escape the cycles of generation and death. Only by passing through Aion's gate can the soul achieve true immortality. He may also hold a staff or scepter, symbols of authority and power. He may be flanked by torchbearers, cots and cotopates in Mithraic iconography, representing the rising and setting sun, birth and death, the two equinoxes or solstices that mark the pivotal moments of the solar year. These attendant figures emphasize Aion's role as the governor of cycles, the one who presides over all transitions and turning points. In the famous mosaic from a Roman villa at Sentinum in Italy, dating to the 3rd century CE, Aion appears at the center of an elaborate scene. He's a beautiful nude youth with a nimbus or halo around his head, standing within a zodiac circle. 4 seasons surround him: spring as a young maiden with flowers, summer as a mature woman with grain, autumn as a man with grapes and fruit, winter as an old man with bare branches. The message is clear. Aion presides over the seasonal cycle, remaining eternally youthful while the seasons age, die, and are reborn around him. Earth goddesses frequently accompany Aion in Roman art. Tellus, the Roman personification of Earth, or Gaia in Greek contexts, reclines at his feet or by his side, often with infants or cornucopias symbolizing fertility and abundance. The pairing makes sense. Time and Earth, temporal and spatial, together constitute the cosmos. Aion provides the temporal dimension, the endless cycles of growth and decay, while Tellus provides the material substrate, the physical world in which those cycles occur. Sometimes Cybele, the Anatolian great mother goddess whose cult was hugely popular in Rome, appears with Aion. Cybele represents wild nature, the untamed fertility of mountains and wilderness, the power of life that cannot be domesticated or controlled. Her presence alongside Aion suggests that nature's wild generativity and time's cosmic order are complementary principles. The seasons turn according to Aion's law, but within those seasons, Cybele's creative power runs free. The Roman goddess Eternitas, Eternity, is essentially a Latin version of Aion, though she's depicted differently, usually as a female figure holding a globe or symbols of abundance, sometimes with a phoenix, the bird that dies in flames and is reborn from its own ashes, another perfect symbol of cyclic renewal. Eternitas appears on countless Roman coins, especially from the imperial period, with legends like Eternitas Augusti, the eternity of the emperor, or Eternitas Imperii, the eternity of the empire. The message to Rome's subjects was clear: Roman rule is eternal, guaranteed by divine Aion eternitas. This brings us to an important point about Aion in the Roman context. He became a political symbol. Roman emperors, desperate to legitimize their rule and assure continuity after the chaos of civil wars, appropriated Aion's imagery to claim eternal authority. If Aion represents the eternal order of the cosmos, and the emperor stands under Aion's protection, or even as Aion's earthly representative, then the emperor's rule is likewise eternal, part of the cosmic order itself, not subject to mortal contingencies. This political theology reached its apex in the imperial cult, where deceased emperors were deified and living emperors were treated as semi-divine. The emperor became cosmocrator, world ruler, occupying the same cosmic position as Aion. The imperial saeculum was the cosmic age, the moment when heaven and earth aligned under the perfect rule of the divinely appointed sovereign. Aion guaranteed this eternal arrangement. Of course, Rome wasn't eternal. The empire declined, fragmented, and fell, at least in the West. But while it lasted, Aion's image on coins, monuments, and public art served to reassure Romans that despite wars, plagues, invasions, and political instability, the underlying cosmic order remained intact, and Rome's place within that order was secure. Beyond imperial propaganda, however, Aion's imagery held genuine religious meaning for people seeking understanding of existence beyond the material. In private devotional contexts, small shrines, personal amulets, sarcophagi reliefs, Aion appears not as a guarantor of political power, but as a spiritual principle, a focus for meditation on mortality, eternity, and the soul's fate after death. Sarcophagi, those elaborate stone coffins carved with mythological scenes, sometimes feature Aion in contexts relating to death and afterlife. He appears presiding over the seasonal cycles, reminding the deceased and their survivors that death is not an end but a transition within the eternal cycle. Or he appears with Dionysus, the god of wine, ecstasy, and resurrection, who himself dies and returns, whose myths emphasize transformation and rebirth. The connection between Aion and Dionysus is important and complex. In some mystery traditions, they're identified with each other or treated as aspects of the same divine reality. Dionysus, like Aion, is a god of contradiction and paradox, male and female, young and old, mortal and immortal. Dionysus is torn apart and reassembled in myth, dying and resurrecting. He's the god of the vine, which is pruned to apparent death each winter and springs to vibrant life each spring. He's the god of ecstatic madness that dissolves the boundaries of self and other, time and eternity. In Dionysian frenzy, the initiate steps outside Chronos, outside ordinary consciousness and ordinary time, and touches something eternal. So when we see Aion depicted in art, we're seeing much more than a god. We're seeing a complex symbol system encoding ideas about time, eternity, cosmos, soul, death, rebirth, political authority, and spiritual transformation. Every element, the nude youth or aged man, the Zodiac circle, the Ouroboros, the seasonal figures, the earth goddess, the keys, the attendant symbols, contributes to a visual theology that would have been readable to ancient viewers in ways we can only partially reconstruct. Understanding these images requires us to think symbolically rather than literally, to see the artwork not as realistic portraits, but as visual metaphors for abstract truths. The ancients were comfortable with this level of symbolic density in a way modern viewers often aren't. They were trained from childhood to read mythology allegorically, to see gods as representations of natural forces, cosmic principles, or psychological states. Aion, in this system, represents one of the most fundamental principles. the eternal cycling of time within which all existence unfolds. To understand Aion's religious significance, we need to explore the mystery religions where he played a crucial role. These weren't religions in the sense of organized churches with hierarchies and orthodoxies. They were initiatory cults, secret societies centered on particular myths and rituals that promised spiritual transformation, gnosis, divine knowledge, and salvation to their members. The word mystery comes from the Greek mysterion, related to the verb maion, meaning to close or to shut, specifically to close the lips or eyes. Mysteries were secret. You couldn't simply read about them in a book or hear about them in a sermon. You had to be initiated, undergo specific rituals, experience certain revelations firsthand, and you were sworn to secrecy about what happened in those rituals. Revealing the mysteries to the uninitiated was a serious crime, potentially punishable by death. This secrecy makes studying mystery religions challenging. We know they existed. References to them are everywhere in ancient literature, and archaeological remains of their temples survive. But the actual content of their rituals and teachings was often successfully kept secret. What we know comes mostly from indirect references, hostile Christian polemics, artistic depictions, and archaeological evidence that we have to interpret carefully. The most famous mysteries were the Eleusinian mysteries, centered at Eleusis near Athens and dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. These mysteries, celebrated annually, involved elaborate multi-day rituals including purification, fasting, a nighttime procession, and culminating in a revelation shown to initiates in the Telesterion, the Great Initiation Hall at Eleusis. What was shown remains unknown. The secret was kept remarkably well, but it involved something about death, rebirth, grain, and the promise of a blessed afterlife. The Eleusinian mysteries were essentially agricultural in their symbolism. Persephone, daughter of Demeter, goddess of grain and harvest, is abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld. Demeter, grieving, causes the earth to become barren. Eventually, a compromise is reached. Persephone spends part of each year in the underworld with Hades and part on earth with her mother. When Persephone descends, winter comes and the earth lies dormant. When she returns, spring arrives and life renews. The cycle of the seasons, death and resurrection, loss and recovery. This is the pattern the mysteries celebrated. Aion fits perfectly into this theology. He is the eternal cycle itself, the cosmic principle that ensures Persephone will always return, that spring will always follow winter, that death always leads back to life. An inscription at Eleusis dedicating a statue of Aion links him explicitly to the persistence of the mysteries. He guarantees that these eternal patterns will continue forever. The Orphic mysteries, as we've discussed, had their own elaborate cosmogony with Chronos, Aion, and the succession of divine rulers. But Orpheism was also deeply concerned with the fate of the individual soul. Orphics believed the soul was divine in origin but trapped in matter, imprisoned in the body through a cycle of reincarnation. The goal of Orphic practice, ritual purification, vegetarian diet, initiation into the mysteries, was to free the soul from this cycle and return it to its divine source. Aion, in this context, represents the wheel of reincarnation itself, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth through which souls must pass. But he also represents the possibility of escape. If Aion is the cosmic cycle, then to understand Aion, to achieve gnosis of his true nature, is to transcend the cycle. The initiate who grasps the eternal patterns behind temporal existence, who realizes their soul's divine nature, can potentially exit the wheel of generation and achieve immortality, not in the sense of living forever in time, but of existing in eternity in Aion's realm beyond temporal succession. Gold tablets have been found in graves throughout the Greek world, placed in the mouths of deceased Orphic initiates, inscribed with instructions for the soul's journey after death. These Orphic gold tablets describe the soul's passage through the underworld, the choices it must make, the things it must say to the guardians of various realms. One recurring instruction tells the soul to avoid one path and take another, to drink from the spring of memory rather than the spring of forgetfulness, to declare its divine origin to the rulers of the underworld. The tablets reveal an eschatology, a theology of the afterlife, where the soul can escape the cycle of reincarnation and achieve permanent existence in a blessed state. This is not unlike the goal of Buddhism, escaping samsara through enlightenment, or Gnosticism, escaping the material cosmos through gnosis. And Aion, as the principle governing cosmic cycles, becomes the key to this escape. Understanding Aion means understanding the nature of the cycle itself, and such understanding is the first step toward transcending it. The Dionysian mysteries, centered on the god Dionysus, were wildly ecstatic and transformative. Unlike the relatively orderly Eleusinian mysteries, Dionysian rites involved wine, music, dancing, and frenzy. Menadic madness where participants, particularly women, called maenads or bacchantes, would dance themselves into ecstatic states, supposedly possessed by the god himself. Dionysus was a god of boundary crossing and transformation. He was foreign yet Greek, male yet effeminate, divine yet mortal, born of a mortal mother, civilized yet wild. His followers included respectable Greek matrons who would leave their homes, go into the mountains, and engage in frenzied worship that transgressed every norm of proper Greek feminine behavior. In Dionysian ecstasy, normal identity dissolved. You were no longer merely yourself. You were possessed by the god, merged with divine power, experiencing a state beyond ordinary consciousness. This ecstatic dissolution of self connects to Aion through the concept of escaping linear time. In the frenzy of Dionysian worship, past and future collapse into an eternal present. You're not remembering or anticipating. You're simply being, intensely and completely, in a way that feels timeless. This is not Aion as cosmic principle, but Aion as lived experience, the eternal now achieved through ecstatic practice. The mythology of Dionysus reinforces this connection. In Orphic tradition, Dionysus is killed by the Titans, torn apart and consumed. But his heart is saved, and from it he is resurrected. Or in other versions, he's reborn from Zeus's thigh. Either way, Dionysus dies and resurrects, embodying the death and rebirth pattern that Aion represents cosmically. The grapevine itself, Dionysus's sacred plant, follows this pattern, appearing dead in winter and bursting into life in spring. Wine, Dionysus's gift to humanity, is transformative. It changes consciousness, alters perception, loosens inhibitions. In ancient understanding, wine didn't just get you drunk, it allowed the god to enter you, to possess you, to transform you temporarily into something more than merely human. This transformation was both dangerous and sacred. Dionysian worship could lead to madness, violence, even death, as myths like that of Pentheus demonstrate. But it could also lead to ecstatic union with the divine, to experiencing directly the eternal forces behind temporal existence. The connection between Aion and Dionysus appears in art where they're depicted together or identified with each other. Both are gods of paradox and transformation. Both relate to cycles, Dionysus to the vegetative cycle of death and rebirth, Aion to the cosmic cycle of ages. Both offer a path beyond ordinary existence, Dionysus through ecstasy, Aion through understanding eternity. The mystery cult of Cybele, the Anatolian mother goddess, also incorporated Aion into its theology and iconography. Cybele's cult was orgiastic and intense, featuring loud music, frenzied dancing, and in some contexts, self-castration by priests called Gali who emasculated themselves in devotion to the goddess. Her myth centered on her love for Attis, a beautiful youth who died. In most versions, he castrates himself under a pine tree and bleeds to death, and was resurrected or transformed. The annual festival of Cybele and Attis in Rome, celebrated in late March, ritually reenacted this death and resurrection. Devotees would mourn Attis's death with elaborate lamentation, fast and purify themselves, and then celebrate his resurrection with joy and feasting. This is yet another mystery cult centered on the death-rebirth cycle, the eternal pattern of loss and recovery. Cybele herself represents untamed nature, the wild generative power of the earth. She's depicted crowned with a mural crown, representing city walls, attended by lions, enthroned as queen of the natural world. When she appears alongside Aion in art, the message is clear. She provides the material substance and generative force of the cosmos, while he provides the temporal structure, the cyclic pattern according to which her creative power manifests. The Toribolium, a controversial ritual associated with Cybele's cult, involved the sacrifice of a bull. The initiate would stand in a pit beneath a grating while a bull was slaughtered above, showering the person in the animal's blood. This baptism in bull's blood was thought to purify and regenerate the initiate, offering a kind of rebirth. The ritual's connection to Aion and eternal cycles is implicit through ritual death, symbolized by the bull's sacrifice, and rebirth, symbolized by the blood baptism. The initiate participates in the eternal pattern of regeneration. All these mystery cults, Eleusinian, Orphic, Dionysian, Cybelian, shared certain features despite their differences. They all promised initiates something beyond what civic religion offered: personal salvation, spiritual transformation, understanding of cosmic truth, and assurance about the afterlife. They all involved secret rituals that created intense community bonds among initiates. They all used mythology and ritual to convey truths that couldn't be communicated through ordinary language or rational argument. And they all, to varying degrees, incorporated Aion or Aion-related concepts into their theologies. The appeal of these mysteries in the Hellenistic and Roman periods shouldn't be underestimated. As empires expanded and traditional local identities weakened, as people migrated from rural villages to cosmopolitan cities, as certainty about the old gods and old ways eroded, the mysteries offered something new: a personal relationship with the divine, a promise of individual salvation not dependent on your social status or ethnic origin, and answers to existential questions about death, suffering, and meaning. If you were initiated into the Eleusinian mysteries, you could die knowing that you'd been shown the secret truth about death and rebirth, that you had communion with Demeter and Persephone, that a blessed afterlife awaited you. If you were an Orphic initiate, you possessed the knowledge needed to navigate the underworld successfully, to avoid reincarnation, to return your soul to its divine source. If you were a devotee of Dionysus or Cybele, you'd experienced the god's power directly, been possessed by divine ecstasy, participated in the eternal cycle of death and resurrection. And Aion, presiding over all these cycles and transformations, was the ultimate mystery. To understand Aion was to grasp the deepest truth about existence, that beneath all change lies an eternal pattern, that death is not an end but a transition, that the soul is eternal even though the body is mortal, that time is not a prison but a wheel that can be understood and potentially transcended. Of all the mystery religions that incorporated Aion, none did so more prominently or mysteriously than Mithraism. This cult, popular especially among Roman soldiers and merchants from the 1st through 4th century CE, centered on Mithras, a god of Persian origin who slays the cosmic bull in a cave, surrounded by a complex array of symbolic figures and animals. Mithraic worship took place in underground temples called Mithraea, singular Mithraeum, designed to look like caves. These were small, intimate spaces with benches along the walls where initiates would recline for sacred meals, and a relief or fresco at the far end depicting the tauroctony, Mithras slaying the bull, surrounded by various figures including a torch-bearing sun god, a torch-extinguishing moon, a scorpion, a dog, a serpent, and frequently the Zodiac circle. The religion was exclusively male and hierarchical, with 7 grades of initiation through which members could progress: raven, bridegroom, soldier, lion, Persian, sunrunner, and father. Each grade had its own symbols, planetary association, and ritual requirements. Advancement required demonstrated knowledge, virtue, and endurance of various ordeals. Mithraism offered its members a structured path of spiritual development, culminating in the highest mysteries revealed only to fathers of the community. The central myth, as far as we can reconstruct it, involves Mithras being commanded by Sol, the sun god, to capture and slay the primordial bull. Mithras pursues the bull, captures it, drags it to a cave, and sacrifices it. From the bull's blood and body emerge all beneficial plants and animals, grain from its spinal cord, wine from its blood, and so on. The bull's death creates life, transforms cosmic potential into manifested reality. This is, of course, another death and rebirth myth, another enactment of the eternal cycle where death generates life. But Mithraic symbolism goes much deeper than that. The entire scene is laden with astronomical and astrological meaning. The bull represents Taurus. The scorpion attacking the bull's genitals represents Scorpio. The dog is likely the constellation Canis Major or Minor. The serpent might be Hydra or Serpens. Mithras's cap, clothing, and posture may encode information about precession of the equinoxes, the slow wobble of Earth's axis that causes the position of the spring equinox to shift through the zodiac signs over thousands of years. Some scholars argue that the tauroctony depicts a cosmic event, Mithras ending the age of Taurus when the spring equinox was in Taurus, roughly 400 to 2000 BCE, and inaugurating the age of Aries, roughly 2000 BCE to 1C. Or it might symbolize Mithras's power over cosmic time, his ability to control the celestial spheres and the zodiacal ages. The exact interpretation remains hotly debated, but clearly, Mithraism was deeply concerned with astral religion, with understanding the cosmos through the movements of celestial bodies. And this is where Aion enters the picture. In many Mithraea, a figure appears that scholars call the Leontocephaline, the lion-headed one. This figure has the body of a man but the head of a lion. A serpent coils around his body in multiple spirals, sometimes with its head meeting the lion's mouth. The figure stands or kneels within a zodiac circle. He holds keys in his hands, or they hang from his belt. From his body protrude the heads or pertomi of animals, commonly a ram and a goat, possibly representing the spring and autumn equinoxes or summer and winter solstices. Wings often sprout from the Leontocephaline's back, suggesting his divine or celestial nature. Sometimes thunderbolts or other implements are shown. The overall impression is of immense power, of mastery over cosmic forces, of a being who stands at the very center of the universe and commands its fundamental structures. Who is this figure? That's one of the great unresolved questions of Mithraic studies. Most scholars identify him as Aion, though some argue for Chronos, and others suggest Zervan, the Persian god of infinite time. The syncretistic nature of Mithraism blending Persian, Greek, and Roman religious elements, makes definitive identification difficult. If this is Aion, then his lion head requires interpretation. Lions in ancient symbolism represent solar power, kingship, devouring time. The lion as consumer of all things, strength, and sovereignty. The lion is the king of beasts just as Aion is the sovereign of ages. The Zodiac includes Leo, further linking the lion to cosmic cycles. The serpent coiled around him is, as we've seen repeatedly, a symbol of eternity, of cyclic time, of the Ouroboros. The fact that it spirals around his body multiple times might represent the many cycles of time, the ages upon ages over which Aion presides. Where serpent and lion meet, where the serpent's head approaches or enters the lion's mouth, we might see another Ouroboros reference, another symbol of eternity devouring and generating itself. The keys are crucial. In Mithraic theology, the cosmos was conceived as a series of concentric spheres, the 7 planetary spheres: Moon, Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and beyond them the sphere of the fixed stars, the Zodiac. The soul descended from the realm beyond the stars through these spheres, accumulating material accretions and forgetting its divine origin. To achieve salvation, the soul had to reverse this journey, ascending back through the spheres, shedding its material coverings, and exiting through the gate beyond the Zodiac. But this gate was locked. Only Aion held the keys. He was the gatekeeper of eternity, the cosmic bouncer who decided which souls could pass from time into timelessness. In Mithraic initiation, the candidate presumably learned the passwords, the sacred words and knowledge that would convince Aion to unlock the gate and grant passage. This concept of Aion as cosmic gatekeeper appears in magical papyri as well. In certain spells and invocations, the magician must pass through various cosmic gates, each guarded by powerful beings who demand passwords or proofs of authority. Aion appears as one of these gatekeepers, often the ultimate one, the final barrier between the material cosmos and the transcendent divine realm. The ram and goat protruding from the Leontocephaline's body likely represent the spring and autumn equinoxes, the moments when day and night are equal, when the sun crosses the celestial equator. These are the hinges of the year, the turning points in the solar cycle. Aries the ram is associated with spring equinox, while Capricorn the goat is linked to winter solstice. Their presence on Aion's body marks him as the master of these turning points, the one who governs the transitions from season to season. Some depictions show the Leontocephaline standing on a globe or within a circle, emphasizing his cosmic dominion. Others show him with implements in his hands, staffs, scepters, torches, symbols of authority and power. In one remarkable relief from the Mithraeum at Santa Prisca in Rome, the lion-headed figure is labeled as Deus Aramanius, the god Aramanius, possibly equating him with the Zoroastrian evil principle Ahriman. This is puzzling and has led to much scholarly debate about whether the Leontocephaline represents evil, material time that traps souls, or whether the identification is more complex. It's important to understand that Mithraism wasn't a standardized religion with a central authority or creed. Each Mithraeum was essentially independent, and while they shared common symbols and myths, interpretations could vary. What Aion meant in one community might differ from what he meant in another. But across Mithraic contexts, he consistently represents cosmic time, the zodiacal cycles, the barrier between temporal and eternal existence, and the power that governs souls' destinies. The relationship between Mithras and Aion is fascinating. Mithras is the hero god, the active principle who slays the bull and creates the world. Aion is the eternal principle, the cosmic order within which Mithras acts. Mithras is dynamic, Aion is static yet cyclic. Some scholars suggest that Mithras and Aion represent complementary aspects of the same divine reality. Mithras as the god in time, Aion as the god of time. There's also speculation that the highest initiates of Mithraism, those who achieved the 7th grade of Father, were ritually identified with Mithras or even with Aion himself. Having ascended through the 7 grades, corresponding to the 7 planetary spheres, the Father had symbolically exited the cosmos and achieved a divine or near-divine status. In ritual contexts, he may have embodied Aion, acting as the cosmic principle for the community, the living representative of eternal time and order. Archaeological evidence shows that Mithraism spread widely throughout the Roman Empire, particularly in frontier regions and port cities, places where Roman soldiers and merchants were concentrated. Mithraea have been found from Britain to Mesopotamia, from the Rhine frontier to North Africa. The cult offered its members a sense of brotherhood, a structured path of advancement, esoteric knowledge, and the promise of cosmic understanding and salvation. But Mithraism died out in the 4th and 5th centuries, suppressed by triumphant Christianity. The underground temples were destroyed or converted to Christian use. The secrets were lost. No Mithraic scripture survives, if any ever existed. What we know comes from archaeology and hostile Christian accounts. The mysteries were kept too well, now they're genuinely lost. Yet Aion's image in Mithraic contexts, the lion-headed figure within the Zodiac, holding the keys to eternity, remains one of the most powerful and enigmatic icons from ancient religion. It speaks to humanity's perennial questions about time, fate, death, and what lies beyond. Can we escape time? Is there a gate to eternity? What knowledge, what passwords, what transformation is required to pass through? Mithraism claimed to have the answers, and Aion was the key, literally, with those keys in his hands, to unlocking them. Alexandria in Egypt was one of the great cosmopolitan centers of the Hellenistic world, a city where Greek, Egyptian, Jewish, and other cultures mixed and syncretized. It was here that the cult of Serapis was created, a deliberately syncretic deity combining Greek Zeus, Egyptian Osiris, and other divine elements into a god who could appeal across cultural boundaries. Serapis was depicted as a bearded, enthroned figure resembling Zeus, but with Egyptian religious overtones. His cult combined Greek and Egyptian elements in worship style, temple architecture, and mythology. And associated with Serapis in Alexandria was a fascinating ritual involving Aion that gives us one of the most detailed descriptions we have of religious ceremonies honoring this god. The early Christian writer Epiphanius of Salamis, writing in the 4th century CE, describes a festival celebrated in Alexandria on the night of January 5th to 6th. This was not a Christian festival, though January 6th would later become the Feast of Epiphany in Christianity, but a pagan celebration at the temple of Kore, the maiden. Here's what Epiphanius describes. At midnight on this night, celebrants would descend into an underground shrine. They would bring up a wooden statue that was naked, seated, and marked on forehead, hands, and knees with crosses or similar symbols. The exact symbols are debated. They would carry this statue 7 times around the innermost shrine while music played and incense burned. Then they would return the statue to its underground location, and they would proclaim, "The Virgin has given birth. The light is increasing." Specifically, they would announce that on this day, at this hour, the maiden, that is Kore, has given birth to Aion. This ritual enacts a cosmic birth. The virgin goddess produces Aion without a male consort, bringing forth the eternal principle of time itself. January 6th, just after winter solstice, is when the lengthening of daylight becomes perceptibly noticeable. The sun is being reborn. The light is indeed increasing. The darkest part of winter has passed, and though cold weather continues, the days are growing longer. Spring will eventually come because the cosmic cycle has turned. Aion has been born. The virgin birth motif is significant. A virgin birth implies creation without the messy, material process of sexual generation. It's a pure generation, a divine bringing forth. The maiden produces Aion from herself alone, suggesting that time emerges from eternity without any diminishment of eternity, just as a virgin remains a virgin even after giving birth in mythological contexts. This Alexandrian ritual shows Aion as both eternal and newly born, a paradox perfectly in keeping with his nature. He is the eternal god of time who is born annually on January 6th, just as the year is eternal yet born anew each January 1st. He is ancient beyond reckoning, yet always young, the primordial deity who is nevertheless continuously regenerated. The association with increasing light connects Aion to solar theology. In Hellenistic religion, the sun, Helios, was increasingly identified with the supreme divine principle. The sun's apparent death in winter and rebirth in spring, its daily death in the west and resurrection in the east, its never-failing cycle, made it a perfect natural symbol for divine eternity. Aion and Helios, in this context, become different names for the same reality, the eternal solar power that governs cosmic time. The number 7 in the ritual, carrying the statue 7 times around the shrine, connects to the 7 planets, the 7 spheres of the cosmos, the 7 days of the week, all those 7-fold divisions that structured ancient cosmology. The symbolism suggests that Aion's birth governs all these cosmic divisions, that his emergence marks the ordering of the universe into its proper temporal cycles. Epiphanius, writing as a Christian polemicist, was highlighting this pagan ritual to show how pagans had their own virgin birth myths, implying that Christianity's virgin birth of Jesus was not unique. But his testimony, biased though it may be, gives us invaluable information about how Aion was actually worshipped in a specific time and place. The identification of Aion with the divine child born at the winter solstice appears in other contexts too. In Roman celebrations of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, December 25th marked the birth of the solar deity. This date, chosen for Christian Christmas, was already associated with the birth of various solar gods, and Aion, as the god of eternal solar time, participated in this mythology. The logic is clear. The winter solstice, the darkest and shortest day of the year, marks the moment when the sun's power is at its nadir. After this point, the days begin lengthening. The sun has been defeated, has descended to its lowest point, and now begins its victorious ascent. It's born again, a divine child emerging from the dark womb of winter, destined to grow in power until reaching its zenith at summer solstice. Aion, governing this cycle, is both the child born at solstice and the eternal principle that ensures the cycle will continue forever. He's the solar year personified, dying at the end of December and resurrected at the beginning of January. Every new year is Aion's birthday because every year is Aion. He is the year, the cycle of seasons, the eternal return of time. The Virgin Mother, called Kore in the Alexandrian ritual, connects this theology to the Eleusinian mysteries. Kore, the maiden, is another name for Persephone, who, as we discussed earlier, represents the death and rebirth of vegetation, the descent into the underworld and return to life. That Kore would give birth to Aion makes perfect sense. From the principle of cyclic death and rebirth, Persephone Kore, emerges the personification of eternal cycles themselves, Aion. But this maternal deity might also be Isis, the great Egyptian goddess whose cult was enormously popular throughout the Roman Empire. Isis was the divine mother par excellence, the throne of Egypt personified, the goddess of magic and wisdom who resurrected her murdered husband Osiris and gave birth to their son Horus. Isis temples existed throughout the Mediterranean, including in Alexandria, where her cult merged with Greek religious elements. Isis was often depicted as a virgin mother, her impregnation by the already dead Osiris having a miraculous quality. She was called Queen of Heaven, Star of the Sea, Mother of God, among many other titles. Her annual festivals included mourning for the dead Osiris and celebrating his resurrection, reenacting the eternal pattern of death and rebirth. If Isis is the mother who gives birth to Aion in the Alexandrian ritual, then Aion becomes analogous to Horus, the divine child, the solar god, the principle of royal and cosmic order. Serapis, the syncretic god of Alexandria, may also figure into this complex. Serapis was identified with both Zeus and Osiris, making him a kind of supreme deity combining Greek and Egyptian elements. His consort was Isis. If Serapis represents the father principle, even if not involved in Aion's virgin birth, and Isis/Kore represents the mother principle, then Aion is their divine offspring, the manifestation of divine power in the temporal realm. The complexity and fluidity of these identifications demonstrates the syncretic nature of Hellenistic Roman religion. Gods merged and separated, were equated and distinguished according to context and need. Aion could be Serapis's son, or Kore's virgin-born child, or an aspect of Helios, or identical with Phan's Dionysus, or the supreme deity above all others, depending on which theological framework you were operating within. This wasn't considered contradictory. Divine reality was understood to be multi-layered, expressing itself differently in different contexts. The Alexandrian ritual, with its midnight timing, its underground shrine, its procession and music, created a sacred moment outside ordinary time. The participants weren't merely celebrating a mythological event, they were ritually participating in it, making it present and real. At midnight on January 6th, in that underground shrine, Aion truly was being born. The eternal entered time, and time was renewed. The cycle completed and began again. The celebrants witnessed and participated in the fundamental mystery of existence, that the eternal continuously manifests in the temporal without ever ceasing to be eternal. This kind of ritual participation in divine reality characterizes mystery religions generally. You weren't learning about the gods as abstract concepts. You were experiencing their reality, merging with their power, becoming temporarily divine yourself through ritual action. The distinction between myth and history, symbol and reality, collapsed in the sacred space and time of the mystery. Aion's birth was both a mythological truth, it happens eternally, and a historical event, it happened that night. One of the most remarkable artistic representations of Aion survives in the form of the Parabiago plate, a large silver dish discovered in 1907 near Parabiago in northern Italy, dating to the 4th century CE. This extraordinary object, now in the Archaeological Museum in Milan, presents a complex scene packed with symbolic figures that scholars have spent over a century trying to fully interpret. The plate is approximately 16 inches in diameter, made of silver with some gilding, and shows remarkably fine craftsmanship. The central scene depicts a divine couple riding in a chariot drawn by 4 lions. The male figure is bearded and wears a radiate crown. The female figure is richly dressed and crowned. Surrounding this central tableau are multiple concentric rings filled with various figures and symbols, creating a cosmic diagram that maps both space and time. Let me describe what we see, working from the center outward. The central couple in the chariot is generally identified as Cybele and Attis, or possibly as a cosmic couple representing earth and sky, time and space, or other complementary divine principles. The bearded male holds a staff or scepter and orb, symbols of cosmic authority. The lions pulling their chariot are symbolizes, sacred animals, representing untamed nature and royal power. Immediately surrounding the chariot are the four seasons, depicted as figures with appropriate attributes. Spring appears as a youth with flowers. Summer is mature, bearing grain and a scythe. Autumn carries grapes and fruit. Winter is elderly, with bare branches. These four seasons embody the yearly cycle, the eternal recurrence of growth, fruition, decline, and dormancy that structures agricultural and natural time. Beyond the seasons, in another ring, appear the signs of the Zodiac, the 12 constellations that mark the sun's annual path through the heavens. The Zodiac creates a circle of time around the central scene, a cosmic clock that measures out months and years in endless rotation. And here, within or alongside the Zodiac circle, appears Aion. He's depicted as a nude, youthful male figure, his posture suggesting movement or dancing, surrounded by or merged with the Zodiac band. In some interpretations, he's shown holding or supporting the Zodiac circle, emphasizing his role as the principle that animates and governs these cosmic cycles. Also present are Atlas, the Titan who holds up the sky, shown supporting the celestial sphere, Gaia or Tellus, the earth goddess, reclining with cornucopias and children, Uranus, sky, arching over the scene, Oceanus, the world-encircling river, various winds depicted as youthful winged heads, and possibly other deities or personifications. The overall effect is of a cosmic map, a visual theology showing the structure of the universe and the divine principles that govern it. The central couple represents the generative heart of the cosmos, divine power that creates and sustains all existence. The seasons represent the temporal cycle, the pattern of growth and decay that governs all living things. The Zodiac represents the celestial order, the movement of the stars that measures and defines time. Aion, present within this Zodiac, is the animator and governor of these cycles, the divine principle of eternal return. The Parabiago plate can be read as a meditation on time, space, and divine order. Space is represented by the earth, Tellus, the sky, Uranus, the ocean, Oceanus, and Atlas holding the celestial sphere, the four cosmic regions that together constitute the physical universe. Time is represented by the seasons, annual cycle, the Zodiac, monthly and yearly cycles, and Aion, eternal cosmic time. The central couple, whether Cybele and Attis or some other identification, represents the divine generative power that sustains both space and time, that makes existence possible. Why was such an elaborate cosmological scene created on a serving dish? The Parabiago plate was likely used in religious rituals, possibly in the cult of Cybele or in a syncretic context where multiple deities and theological systems merged. Ritual meals were central to ancient religious practice. To eat from a plate showing this cosmic scene would be to participate in the divine order, to consume food that connected you to the eternal cycles of nature, to ingest both physical and spiritual nourishment. The plate might also have been used in mystery initiations. Imagine being a new initiate, and as part of your initiation ceremony, sacred food is served on this plate. You're told to look carefully at the images to understand what they represent. The priest or hierophant explains, "Here is the cosmos, here are the seasons, here is the Zodiac, here is Aion who governs eternal time. You are part of this cosmic order. Your life follows these cycles. Death and rebirth, growth and decay, are not just natural processes, but divine realities. By understanding these mysteries, you understand your place in eternity." The 4th century dating of the plate is significant. This is late antiquity, a period when traditional Greco-Roman paganism was under increasing pressure from triumphant Christianity. The old gods were being marginalized, their temples closed, their rituals suppressed. The Parabiago plate represents a sophisticated pagan theology, created at a time when such theology was becoming dangerous to profess publicly. It's worth noting that the imagery on the plate doesn't represent a simple, primitive paganism. This is not crude idol worship or superstitious ritual. This is refined, philosophical theology, expressing complex ideas about cosmology, time, divine order, and the relationship between eternal and temporal existence. The creators and users of this plate were educated, thoughtful people engaging with profound questions about reality. The presence of Aion on the plate alongside Cybele, Attis, the seasons, and the Zodiac shows how he had become integrated into the wider symbolic vocabulary of late antique paganism. He wasn't a separate cult figure worshipped in isolation. He was part of a complex web of divine principles and personifications that together mapped the sacred cosmos. When we look at the Parabiago plate today, we're looking at a snapshot of a lost religious world. We can admire its artistic craftsmanship, the fine detail work, the balanced composition, the elegant figures. But we're also seeing a theological statement, a visual argument about the nature of existence. The plate says, the cosmos is ordered, not chaotic. Time is cyclic, not arbitrary. Divine principles govern all things. And Aion, as the personification of eternal time, is central to this cosmic order. When Greek culture and religion spread throughout the Roman Empire, a process beginning with Rome's conquest of the Greek East in the 2nd century BCE and continuing through the imperial period, Greek gods and concepts were adapted to Roman needs and sensibilities. Aion was no exception. The Romans had their own goddess of eternity, Eternitas. While clearly related to the Greek Aion conceptually, Eternitas had distinctly Roman characteristics and functions. She was depicted as a female figure, often holding a globe, representing cosmic dominion, sometimes with a phoenix, the bird that dies and resurrects, symbolizing eternal renewal, sometimes with symbols of abundance like cornucopias or grain. But more importantly, Eternitas became deeply entwined with imperial ideology. From Augustus onward, Roman emperors claimed to inaugurate new ages, new secula of peace and prosperity guaranteed to last forever. This was political theology at its most ambitious. The emperor's rule wasn't just effective governance. It was a cosmic principle, an eternal order guaranteed by the gods themselves. Coins, the most widespread form of mass communication in the ancient world, carried this message far and wide. Countless Roman imperial coins feature Eternitas with legends like Eternitas Augusti, the eternity of the emperor, or Eternitas Imperii, the eternity of the empire. The message to Rome's subjects was clear and constant. This empire will last forever. This emperor rules with divine sanction. The cosmic order supports Roman power. Submit and prosper in Rome's eternal peace. The phoenix appears frequently on these coins alongside Eternitas. The phoenix legend, originating in Egypt but adopted into Greco-Roman culture, told of a bird that lived for 500 years, or 1,000, or 1,461. Sources vary. Then built itself a nest of aromatic woods, sang a beautiful song, and died in flames. From its ashes, a new phoenix would rise, gather the ashes of its predecessor, and fly them to Heliopolis in Egypt to deposit them at the sun god's temple. Then the cycle would repeat. The phoenix is the perfect symbol for Eternitas and Aion. It represents death and rebirth, the eternal cycle, the renewal that comes from destruction. When Roman coins showed a phoenix alongside Eternitas, they were claiming that Rome, even if it should decline or appear to fall, would regenerate itself phoenix-like and continue eternally. The empire itself partook of Aion's nature, cyclic, eternal, self-renewing. Some emperors took this ideology to extreme lengths. Domitian, ruling from 81 to 96 CE, demanded to be addressed as Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. He claimed divine status during his lifetime, not just the posthumous deification that some emperors received. His coins emphasized eternity, divine favor, eternal rule. Of course, Domitian was assassinated after 15 years of rule. So much for eternity. But the ideology persisted because it served important functions. For the emperors, claiming eternal rule backed by cosmic principle legitimized their power and discouraged rebellion. Why fight against what the universe itself guarantees? For the empire's subjects, the promise of eternal Rome provided stability and predictability. Even as individual emperors rose and fell, often violently, the concept of eternal empire suggested that beneath the political chaos, a fundamental order persisted. The Aurelian Wall in Rome, constructed in the 3rd century CE during a period of serious military threat, bears inscriptions invoking eternitas. The walls were meant to defend Rome physically, but invoking eternity defended it spiritually and psychologically. Rome is eternal, the inscriptions declare. Barbarians may hammer at the gates, but they cannot break what the gods have made everlasting. The Roman historian Ammianus Marcellinus, writing in the 4th century CE, describes an embassy from the Senate to Emperor Constantius II in 357 CE. The senators addressed the emperor, saying he is destined by eternitas to preserve eternity itself. The flattery is extreme, but it shows how embedded this ideology had become. The emperor isn't just a powerful ruler. He's the human focal point of cosmic eternity, the living connection between temporal Rome and eternal divine reality. Interestingly, as Christianity became the dominant religion of the Roman Empire in the 4th and 5th centuries, this eternal empire ideology didn't disappear. It transformed. Christian emperors and theologians argued that Rome's eternal destiny was now guaranteed by the Christian God rather than pagan eternitas or Aion. The empire was eternal because it served divine Christian purposes. This is how Augustine in the 5th century could write about the city of God as an eternal reality even while actual Rome was being sacked by barbarians. The phoenix symbol, so prominent in Roman eternal empire iconography, was adopted by Christianity. The phoenix became a symbol of Christ's resurrection, of the Christian soul's resurrection, of the church's eternal nature. The bird that dies and rises from its ashes was too perfect a symbol to abandon. It was simply reinterpreted in Christian terms. So even though explicit worship of Aion and eternitas ended with the triumph of Christianity, the conceptual frameworks they embodied, eternal cosmic order, cyclic time, guaranteed divine order, the possibility of transcending mortality, persisted, transformed, and re-emerged in new forms. Ideas this fundamental don't simply disappear when a religion changes. They go underground. They adapt. They find new expressions. In Rome itself, numerous monuments and buildings featured imagery of eternitas and eternal cycles. Temples, triumphal arches, public buildings were decorated with depictions of the Zodiac, seasonal cycles, and personifications of eternal time. The Campus Martius, a large public area in Rome, featured a massive sundial using an Egyptian obelisk as its gnomon. The shadow of the obelisk marked hours, days, and seasons across an enormous pavement inscribed with calendrical information. This was Aion's domain. Cosmic time made visible and measurable, the eternal cycles rendered in stone and bronze for citizens to read and understand. The Roman architectural historian Vitruvius, writing in the 1st century BCE, described how public buildings should be oriented according to solar and seasonal considerations, how the movements of the heavenly bodies should influence civic planning. This is astrological urbanism, the idea that human cities should mirror and harmonize with cosmic order. And cosmic order was Aion's order, the eternal pattern of celestial cycles. Private homes featured similar imagery, mosaics showing the seasons, the Zodiac. Aion himself were common in the homes of wealthy Romans. These weren't just decorative. They were statements of philosophical sophistication and connection to cosmic order. To have the Zodiac on your floor or Aion on your wall was to assert your understanding of deep truth, your participation in eternal patterns. Sarcophagi, those elaborate stone coffins commissioned by wealthy Romans for their burials, frequently featured seasonal imagery, zodiac symbols, and representations of Aion or Eternitas. This made perfect sense. The deceased was embarking on a journey from temporal to eternal existence, from Chronos to Aion. Surrounding the corpse with images of eternal cycles, cosmic order, and the deity who governed the transition from time to eternity was both hopeful and appropriate. Some sarcophagi show Dionysian scenes, the god of wine and resurrection surrounded by his ecstatic followers, combined with zodiac symbols and Aion. The message, in death, you join Dionysus in his eternal cycle of death and rebirth. You become part of the cosmic order that Aion personifies. Your individual life has ended, but you continue in eternity. While Aion functioned in religion and cult, he also had a rich career in philosophy. Greek and Roman philosophers spent centuries thinking about time, eternity, and the relationship between temporal existence and eternal being. Aion was central to these discussions, evolving from a relatively simple concept in early Greek thought to an incredibly sophisticated principle in late antique Neoplatonism. We've already discussed Plato's crucial distinction in the Timaeus between Aion, eternal being, and Chronos, temporal becoming. For Plato, the physical world is a moving image of eternity, created by the demiurge as the best possible imitation of eternal forms. Time is part of creation, not something that exists prior to or independent of the created cosmos. And Aion, eternity, is the transcendent model that time imitates. This raises profound questions. If the eternal forms exist in Aion, in timeless being, how do temporal things participate in them? How does the changing world of appearance relate to the unchanging world of reality? Plato spent his career wrestling with these questions, and later Platonists continued the work. Aristotle, though he rejected many Platonic doctrines, took time and eternity seriously. For Aristotle, Aion refers to the complete period of anything's existence. The Aion of the heavens is endless duration, since the celestial sphere rotates eternally without change or decay. But this isn't timeless eternity in Plato's sense. It's everlasting time, unending temporal duration. Aristotle's cosmos is eternal in the sense that it has always existed and always will, with the celestial sphere rotating forever and the sublunar world of generation and corruption continuing its cycles perpetually. There's no creation in the Platonic sense, no demiurge shaping chaos into order at some temporal beginning. Instead, the cosmos simply is and always has been, its eternal cyclic motions providing the measure of time. The Stoics, as mentioned earlier, had their own interpretation. For them, Aion referred to the complete cosmic cycle from conflagration to conflagration. The universe goes through vast periods of existence, each one exactly like the last and like all future ones. After each ekpyrosis, universal fire, a palingenesis, rebirth, occurs and the cosmos begins again, playing out the same events in the same order with the same outcomes forever. This means that everything that happens is both unique, happening in this particular cosmic cycle, and eternal, happening in every cosmic cycle. You are living this exact life for the infinite time, and you will live it again infinitely many times. The Stoics accepted this as part of living in accordance with nature and divine reason, logos. The wise person accepts fate, understands that everything is part of an eternal cosmic pattern, and lives virtuously within that understanding. Philo of Alexandria, bridging Jewish theology and Greek philosophy, used Aion to describe God's mode of existence. God is eternal in the strongest sense, existing outside time entirely, not subject to past or future, living in a perpetual present. The created world exists in Chronos, experiencing temporal succession, but God exists in Aion, in pure, timeless eternity. Philo's work would heavily influence Christian theology's understanding of divine eternity versus created temporality. But the most sophisticated philosophical development of Aion comes from the Neoplatonists, particularly Plotinus in the 3rd century CE and his successors Porphyry, Iamblichus, Proclus, and others through the 6th century. Neoplatonism was the last great flowering of pagan Greek philosophy, synthesizing Plato, Aristotle, Stoicism, and other schools into an elaborate metaphysical system. For Plotinus, Aion is a hypostasis, a level or principle of reality. In Plotinian metaphysics, all reality flows from the One, the absolute transcendent principle beyond being, thought, or description. From the One proceeds nous, intellect, or mind, the realm of the eternal forms, which exists in perfect unity while containing multiplicity. From nous proceeds soul, which mediates between the intellectual and material realms. And from soul proceeds the material cosmos we inhabit. Aion is the life of nous. Nous exists in eternity, in Aion, not in the sense of lasting forever in time, but in the sense of existing in a mode where all its content is simultaneously present, where there is no succession, no before and after, only the eternal now of intellectual contemplation. When nous thinks the forms, it doesn't think them sequentially, first one, then another. It comprehends them all at once in a single eternal act of intellectation. This is eternity in the strictest philosophical sense. Not endless time, but the absence of time, the mode of existence that doesn't involve temporal succession at all. Aion is this mode. It's the eternal present of intellectual reality, the life of the forms, the being of nous. But, and this is where it gets complex, when soul contemplates nous, it can't grasp all the eternal content at once. Soul is less unified, more dispersed. So soul's contemplation of eternity happens sequentially, one thought after another, one moment following the previous. This sequential contemplation is Chronos, time. Time is the life of soul, just as eternity is the life of nous. Plotinus writes in the Enneads, Aion is the life of the intelligible, a life that abides in sameness and identity, already in possession of all without bound. Chronos, on the other hand, is the image of Aion, the life of soul proceeding in change from one activity to another. This is extraordinarily subtle. Eternity isn't just a very long time. It's a completely different mode of existence. And time isn't just a diminished version of eternity. It's eternity's moving image, eternity reflected in a medium, soul, that cannot grasp eternity's unity all at once and so must unpack it sequentially. The implications are profound. If you could somehow transcend soul and unite with nous, you would exit time and enter eternity. You would experience not endless duration but the timeless now, the eternal present where all reality exists simultaneously without succession. This is the goal of Neoplatonic spiritual practice, to ascend through the hypostases, to elevate consciousness from the material world through soul to nous, and ultimately to union with the One. Aion, in this framework, isn't just a god or a personification. He's a metaphysical reality, a level of being that can be experienced through philosophical and spiritual practice. The mysteries that promised communion with Aion weren't offering mythology or fantasy. They were offering a path to experiencing this eternal mode of being directly. Proclus, writing in the 5th century CE, developed these ideas further. For Proclus, everything exists in 3 modes. As cause in its prior, for example, soul exists as cause in nous, as constituted reality at its own level, soul as soul, and as participated by its consequent, soul as participated by material beings. Aion exists as cause in the One, as constituted reality in nous, and as participated by soul, which produces Chronos as its own measure of life. This might sound abstract to the point of incomprehensibility, and in a way it is. Neoplatonists were trying to articulate truths that they believed exceeded normal language and conceptualization. But the underlying idea is that Aion represents a fundamental aspect of reality, the eternal dimension, the timeless ground of being from which temporal existence flows, but which is never diminished or altered by that flowing. The Neoplatonists were the last pagan philosophers, working in a world increasingly dominated by Christianity. Their schools in Athens and elsewhere would be closed by Christian emperors in the 6th century. But their ideas didn't die. They were absorbed into Christian theology, where they influenced doctrines about God's eternity, about the relationship between divine eternity and created time, about the soul's capacity to ascend from temporal to eternal reality. When Christian theologians like Augustine talked about God existing in eternity while creation exists in time, they were using conceptual frameworks developed by pagan philosophers thinking about Aion. When mystics like Pseudo-Dionysius described the soul's ascent to God as a movement from multiplicity to unity, from time to eternity, they were drawing on Neoplatonic metaphysics. Aion, even under a different name, continued to structure Christian thinking about ultimate reality. One of the most fascinating aspects of studying Aion is tracking his identification and conflation with other deities. The Hellenistic and Roman periods were characterized by intense religious syncretism, the merging and identification of gods from different cultures and traditions. Aion, as an abstract principle as much as a personality, was particularly prone to this syncretic tendency. We've already mentioned the confusion between Aion and Chronos. Both are time gods. Both have serpentine associations. Both appear in similar cosmological contexts. By the Roman period, many writers and artists treated them as identical or as alternative names for the same deity. The distinction that mattered to philosophers, Aion as eternal cyclic time versus Chronos as linear temporal succession, often collapsed in popular religion, where both names might refer to the same cosmic principle. The identification with the titan Chronos, added further confusion. Chronos, father of Zeus, ruler during the Golden Age before being overthrown and imprisoned in Tartarus, had a name that sounded like Chronos. By late antiquity, Father Time, the aged man with scythe, measuring time, eventually killing all things, is a conflated figure drawing on Chronos, the cosmic principle, Cronus the Titan, and Aion, the eternal god. Aion was also identified with Dionysus, especially in Orphic and mystery contexts. Both are gods of paradox, young and old, mortal and immortal, dying and resurrecting. Both are associated with the Ouroboros, with cycles of death and rebirth, with mystery initiations, with the promise of escaping temporal existence, and achieving eternity. In some Orphic theology, Dionysus Zagreus, the first Dionysus, torn apart by Titans and resurrected, is explicitly identified with Aion, the primordial deity born from the cosmic egg. The syncretic tendency went even further. Aion was identified with Helios, the sun god, since the sun's eternal cyclic journey measures out days and years and ages. He was identified with Serapis, the syncretic Greco-Egyptian god of Alexandria. He was identified with Osiris, the Egyptian god of death and resurrection who rules the underworld and judges the dead. He was identified with Mithra/Mithras, the Persian/Roman god who slays the cosmic bull. He was even identified with Uranus, Greek Uranus, the primordial sky god castrated by his son Chronos, representing the first generation of divine being. This might seem like hopeless confusion. How can one deity be identified with so many completely different gods? But from the ancient syncretic perspective, it made perfect sense. All these gods, despite coming from different cultural traditions and having different mythologies, pointed towards similar cosmic principles. Helios and Aion both relate to cosmic cycles. Dionysus and Osiris both die and resurrect. Serapis and Aion both represent supreme divine power ordering the cosmos. Mithras and Aion both govern souls' destinies and stand at the gateway between time and eternity. The logic of syncretism says, these aren't different gods, they're different cultural names and images for the same divine reality. The Greeks call him Aion, the Egyptians call him Osiris, the Persians call him Zervan. But all are pointing toward the same cosmic principle: eternal time, cyclic existence, divine order, the power that governs death and resurrection. This syncretic approach allowed ancient people to make sense of religious diversity without requiring exclusive claims to truth. Your God and my God might actually be the same God known by different names and worshipped in different ways. We can honor both traditions, perhaps even combine them, creating new synthetic forms that preserve what's essential while adapting to new contexts. The magical papyri show this syncretism in practice. Spells invoke Aion, Helios, Serapis, Mithra, or similar strings of divine names, treating them as a single powerful entity known by multiple names. The more names you invoke, the more aspects of divine power you're calling upon, the more effective your magic. This isn't confusion, it's sophisticated religious technology. In mystery initiations, the various gods might represent different levels of the same reality or different stages of the soul's journey. At one level, you're initiated into the mysteries of Dionysus. At a higher level, you realize Dionysus is an aspect of Aion. At the highest level, you understand that Aion himself is a manifestation of the One, the ultimate divine principle beyond all names and forms. This layered understanding of divinity, popular mythology at the outer level, philosophical theology at the inner level, mystical union at the deepest level, characterized Hellenistic religion. The same deity could be understood in multiple ways depending on the initiate's level of understanding and spiritual development. Christian polemicists mocked this pagan syncretism, calling it confusion and superstition. How could pagans claim all these different gods were the same when they had completely different myths and rituals? But the polemicists misunderstood the logic involved. Syncretism didn't claim the myths were identical. Obviously, Osiris's myth is different from Dionysus's. Rather, it claimed that beneath the mythological diversity, the same cosmic realities were being addressed. Ironically, Christianity itself would engage in massive syncretism, absorbing pagan festivals, symbols, concepts, and even deities, rebranded as saints or demons, into its own framework. The Christian liturgical year follows the old solar cycle that Aion governed. Christian churches were built on pagan temple sites. Christian sacred art incorporated the Zodiac, seasonal imagery, and symbols from mystery religions. The virgin birth, the resurrection, the promise of eternal life. All these had pagan precedents and parallels. Aion himself, though no longer worshipped explicitly, continued to haunt Christian imagination. The Ancient of Days, in the Book of Daniel, later depicted in Christian art as an aged, bearded figure, draws on imagery associated with Aion and Chronos. Concepts of divine eternity versus created temporality, of sacred time versus profane time, of eternal return, in some Christian mystical traditions, all bear traces of Aion's theological legacy. The Ouroboros, Aion's primary symbol, appears in Christian contexts representing eternity, completeness, the Alpha and Omega, the cycle of salvation history. The phoenix became a Christian symbol of resurrection. The Zodiac appears in Christian churches, often at the entrance, representing the cosmic order that Christ transcends yet encompasses. So while the explicit cult of Aion ended with the triumph of Christianity, the concepts, symbols, and theological frameworks he represented persisted, transformed but recognizable, in the new religious order. Gods may die, but the ideas they embody live on, finding new expressions in new religious and philosophical systems. We've mentioned the Ouroboros repeatedly throughout this exploration, but this ancient symbol deserves closer examination. The Ouroboros, the serpent or dragon eating its own tail, is one of humanity's most powerful and enduring symbols, appearing across cultures and millennia, and it's inseparable from Aion's identity. The oldest known representation of an Ouroboros comes from ancient Egypt, appearing in the enigmatic Book of the Netherworld, a funerary text found in the tomb of Tutankhamun dating to the 14th century BCE. The text shows two serpents with their tails in their mouths, encircling the head and feet of an enormous figure representing the sun god during his nighttime journey through the underworld. The Egyptian Ouroboros represented the sun's circuit, the daily cycle of death, setting in the west, entering the underworld, and rebirth, emerging from the underworld, rising in the east. It symbolized the entirety of time, the completeness of existence, the eternal renewal of cosmic order. The serpent eating itself suggested self-sufficiency, eternal return, the cosmos sustaining itself through its own destruction and regeneration. Greek culture adopted the Ouroboros, giving it the name we still use, from the Greek words aura, tail, and boros, eating. In Greek contexts, the Ouroboros represented several related concepts: eternity, cyclic time, the unity of opposites, beginning and end are one, the self-sufficient cosmos, and the process of eternal return. Plato, in the Timaeus, describes the cosmos as a sphere that moves in a circle, self-contained and self-sufficient, needing nothing from outside itself. This philosophical description of the cosmos closely parallels the Ouroboros symbol, a self-enclosed, self-sustaining cycle that feeds itself and renews itself eternally. In alchemical texts, which began appearing in Hellenistic Egypt and continued through medieval Europe, the Ouroboros became a central symbol representing the unity of matter and spirit, the cycle of chemical transformation, and the philosopher's quest for the stone. The alchemical motto, hen to pan, the all is one, often accompanied Ouroboros images, emphasizing the fundamental unity of all existence despite apparent diversity. The Ouroboros appeared in Gnostic texts as a symbol of the material cosmos that traps spiritual beings, the cycle of existence from which enlightened souls must escape. But it also represented the divine wholeness that transcends material limitation, the pleroma or fullness that contains all possibilities. In Norse mythology, The Midgard serpent Jormungandr encircles the world ocean, grasping its own tail. When it releases its tail, Ragnarok, the end of the world, will come. This is another version of the Ouroboros, a cosmic serpent whose circular form maintains the world structure, whose releasing of the circle signals cosmic destruction. But why the serpent? Why is this particular creature chosen to represent eternity across so many cultures? Serpents have unique characteristics that make them powerful symbols. They shed their skin and emerge renewed, suggesting regeneration and eternal life. They can coil in perfect circles, suggesting cosmic wholeness and eternal recurrence. They're liminal creatures, capable of moving through different realms, on land, in water, climbing trees, burrowing underground, suggesting their ability to traverse boundaries between different states of existence. They're often associated with wisdom, transformation, danger, and divine power in various mythologies. The specific form of the Ouroboros, tail-eating, creates a closed loop with no beginning or end, the perfect geometric symbol for eternity. The circle is the most perfect shape in sacred geometry, representing wholeness, completion, divine perfection. A circle has every point equidistant from the center, no angles, no irregularities, infinite rotational symmetry. In a cosmos conceived as spherical, with Earth at the center and celestial spheres rotating around it, the circle and the sphere were the fundamental sacred forms. But the Ouroboros isn't just any circle. It's a living circle that sustains itself through self-consumption. This adds a crucial dynamic element. The Ouroboros doesn't merely exist eternally. It actively creates its eternity through continuous self-destruction and self-generation. This perfectly represents Aion's nature as dynamic rather than static eternity, as cyclic process rather than frozen timelessness. The tail-eating also suggests the paradoxical nature of beginnings and endings. Where does the Ouroboros begin? Where does it end? The answer is nowhere and everywhere. Every point on the circle is both beginning and end. This represents Aion as the eternal cycle where each ending is simultaneously a beginning, where completion leads immediately back to commencement. In representations of Aion, the Ouroboros often forms the Zodiac circle or spirals around his body. This makes perfect sense. The Zodiac is itself an Ouroboros, a circular band of constellations through which the sun travels in an endless cycle. The zodiacal year ends in Pisces and begins again in Aries, but this ending-beginning happens at the same moment, the vernal equinox. End and beginning merge, just as the serpent's tail merges with its mouth. The Ouroboros also appears in association with Mithraism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, and other esoteric traditions of late antiquity. In each context, it carries similar meanings: eternal return, cosmic unity, self-sufficiency, the completion of the great work, transcendence of linear causality. Carl Jung, the 20th century psychologist, was fascinated by the Ouroboros and wrote extensively about its symbolic significance. Jung saw the Ouroboros as representing the primordial unity of the psyche before the differentiation of consciousness and unconsciousness, as a symbol of the self, the totality of the psyche, and as an image of the individuation process where the psyche achieves wholeness by integrating its divided parts back into unity. For Jung, encountering Ouroboros imagery in dreams or active imagination suggested contact with deep archetypal material, with the psyche's drive toward wholeness and integration. The Ouroboros represented both the initial undifferentiated state and the final integrated state, Alpha and Omega, beginning and end unified in eternal circle. Modern physics has found its own Ouroboroses. The cyclic universe models in cosmology propose that the Big Bang and Big Crunch repeat eternally, with each universe dying in gravitational collapse only to explode outward again in a new Big Bang. The cosmos eats its tail, destroying itself and giving birth to itself in an eternal cycle. This isn't mythology. This is serious theoretical physics, using mathematics and observation to arrive at conclusions remarkably similar to ancient Ouroboros cosmology. Quantum mechanics reveals particles that are their own antiparticles, processes that run both forward and backward in time, systems that return to their initial states after completing a cycle. The universe at its most fundamental level seems to be full of Ouroboros-like behavior, suggesting that this ancient symbol may have captured something profound about the nature of reality itself. The Ouroboros endures because it speaks to something deep in human consciousness. Our experience of time as cyclic, day and night, seasons, generations. Our sense that nothing is ever truly created or destroyed, but only transformed. Our intuition that endings and beginnings are ultimately the same. That what seems separate is actually united. When we see an Ouroboros, we're not just seeing a clever piece of symbolism. We're seeing an attempt to visualize eternity, to make visible what is fundamentally invisible, to represent in finite form what is infinite. The symbol succeeds because it's paradoxical. A creature that shouldn't be able to exist, you can't eat yourself without destroying yourself, that nevertheless does exist, transcending the normal logic of existence and non-existence. This is Aion's ultimate meaning. He is the paradox of eternity manifesting in time, of the unchanging appearing in the realm of change, of the one expressing itself as many, of the beginning and end meeting in eternal return. The Ouroboros isn't just Aion's symbol, it is Aion, made visible in serpentine form. Though the explicit worship of Aion ended over 1,500 years ago, his influence persists in surprising ways throughout Western culture, philosophy, and even modern spirituality. Let's trace some of these threads of influence into the present day. We've already mentioned Carl Jung's psychological interpretation of Aion and the Ouroboros. Jung went further, writing an entire book titled Aion, Researches into the Phenomenology of the Self, published in 1951. In this complex work, Jung explores the symbolism of the Christian aeon or age, the archetypal image of the self, and the process of individuation, drawing on astrological, alchemical, and Gnostic sources. For Jung, aeons or ages weren't just arbitrary time periods, but had genuine psychological and archetypal significance. He believed we were transitioning from the Piscean age, characterized by Christianity's dualistic thinking, its emphasis on faith over reason, its savior mythology, to the Aquarian age, characterized by conscious integration, direct individual experience, synthesis of opposites. Whether or not you accept Jung's astrological framework, his psychological use of Aion is interesting. He treats Aion as representing the self, not the ego or conscious personality, but the totality of the psyche, conscious and unconscious integrated into wholeness. The self, for Jung, is eternal in the sense that it transcends the ego's temporal existence, connecting the individual to transpersonal and archetypal realities. Jung's work influenced various New Age and alternative spirituality movements in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The idea of ages or eons, the belief in cyclic historical patterns, the concept of spiritual evolution through successive ages. These all draw, sometimes without acknowledgement, on ancient Aion theology filtered through Jungian psychology. The Theosophical Society, founded in the late 19th century, developed elaborate theories about cosmic and human evolution through successive ages called root races and subraces, each lasting millions of years, cycling through patterns of growth, maturity, decline, and renewal. This is Aion's cosmology in theosophical dress, vast cosmic cycles, eternal patterns, human development through ages. Anthroposophy, developed by Rudolf Steiner in the early 20th century, similarly teaches about successive cultural epochs, each with its own spiritual character and developmental tasks, cycling through patterns that reflect larger cosmic rhythms. Steiner drew on theosophy, Gnosticism, Christianity, and Western esotericism, synthesizing them into a system that treats time as meaningful, patterned, and cyclic in the way Aion represents. Various neo-pagan and magical traditions that emerged in the 20th century have incorporated Aion or Aion-related concepts. Wicca and other neo-pagan religions emphasize the Wheel of the Year, 8 seasonal festivals marking solstices, equinoxes, and cross-quarter days, explicitly treating time as cyclic and sacred. The eternal return of the seasons, the death and rebirth of the solar god, the goddess as both maiden and crone. These are Aion's patterns in contemporary practice. Thelema, the magical and philosophical system developed by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century, is built around the concept of eons. Crowley taught that human history progresses through successive eons, each dominated by a particular magical formula and form of consciousness. The Aeon of Isis, prehistory to approximately 2000 BCE, was matriarchal and characterized by lunar magic. The Aeon of Osiris, approximately 2000 BCE to 1904 CE, was patriarchal and characterized by dying god religions like Christianity. The Aeon of Horus, beginning in 1904 CE, is characterized by the magical child, direct individual will, and the transcendence of old dualities. Whether or not one accepts Crowley's framework, it demonstrates how Aion, as representing cosmic ages and transitional periods, continues to structure modern esoteric thought. Crowley was drawing consciously on ancient sources, particularly Gnostic and Neoplatonic texts that featured Aion prominently. In science fiction and speculative fiction, themes related to Aion recur constantly. Stories about eternal recurrence, cyclic time, civilizations rising and falling in patterns, cosmic cycles of expansion and contraction, characters who exist outside normal time. These all reflect Aion's conceptual legacy. Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness explores themes of cyclic time versus linear history. Isaac Asimov's Foundation series is built around the idea of psychohistory predicting vast historical cycles. Frank Herbert's Dune Chronicles explore how understanding and manipulating time perception can grant power. Contemporary works like Ken Liu's short fiction often deal with circular time, quantum superposition, and nonlinear temporality. These aren't just plot devices. They're philosophical explorations of the same questions ancient Aion theology addressed. Is time fundamentally linear or cyclic? Can we escape temporal causality? What would it mean to exist in eternal return? How does consciousness relate to time? In contemporary philosophy, especially in continental traditions influenced by Nietzsche and Heidegger, questions about time, eternity, and eternal return remain central. Gilles Deleuze's philosophy of difference and repetition engages deeply with eternal return, treating it not as literal cosmological doctrine, but as an ethical and ontological principle. Deleuze argues that eternal return doesn't mean the same events recur, but that difference itself returns. Becoming is eternal. Change is the fundamental reality. This is actually quite close to certain ancient interpretations of Aion. Not static, unchanging eternity, but dynamic eternal becoming, eternal process, eternal transformation that paradoxically remains constant in its constancy of change. In popular culture, the Ouroboros appears constantly in corporate logos, tattoos, jewelry, album covers, video games, and countless other contexts. Often the people using the symbol don't know its full historical and philosophical significance. They just recognize it as a cool-looking symbol representing eternity or cycles or completion. But that intuitive recognition shows the symbol's enduring power. Even without formal education in ancient philosophy, people grasp what the Ouroboros represents. Environmental and ecological thinking has rediscovered cyclic time as superior to linear industrial progress. The understanding that resources are finite, that ecosystems operate in cycles, that what goes around comes around. This is Aion's wisdom applied to planetary sustainability. Indigenous cultures that maintain cyclic worldviews and sustainable practices for millennia are being recognized as having preserved knowledge that industrial culture, with its linear progress ideology, tragically lost. Climate science talks about feedback loops, tipping points, and cycles operating on various timescales from annual to millennial. Understanding Earth's climate requires thinking about multiple overlapping cycles: diurnal, seasonal, annual, Milankovitch cycles of orbital variation, carbon cycles, ocean circulation cycles. This is Aion's domain, the complex interplay of cycles within cycles, patterns within patterns, operating across scales from human to cosmic. Modern physics, as mentioned earlier, has its own encounters with eternal return and cyclic cosmology. Beyond cyclic universe models, quantum mechanics reveals deep connections between time, observation, and the nature of reality that ancient philosophers could only intuit. The block universe interpretation of relativity suggests that all times exist equally. Past, present, and future are all equally real, and the flow of time is an illusion. This is remarkably similar to Aion's eternal present that contains all time simultaneously. Debates in physics about the arrow of time, about whether time is fundamental or emergent, about cyclic versus linear cosmology, are modern versions of debates that raged among ancient philosophers thinking about Aion and Chronos. Even in our everyday language, Aion's legacy persists. When we talk about ages, Stone Age, Iron Age, Modern Age, we're using Aion terminology. When we say something is eternal or aeon long, we're invoking this ancient word. When we describe historical periods as having particular characters or patterns, when we talk about cycles of boom and bust, rise and fall, when we notice patterns repeating across history, we're thinking with Aion's conceptual tools. The question Aion poses, how should we understand time, remains urgently relevant. In our accelerated modern world where technology changes faster than human adaptation, where the future seems increasingly uncertain, where traditional patterns and rhythms have been disrupted, understanding time becomes crucial. Are we trapped in linear progress heading towards some destination, utopian or dystopian? Are we cycling through patterns that will eventually return? Is time an illusion masking eternal presence? Can we escape Chronos and touch Aion? These aren't just abstract philosophical questions. They shape how we live, how we make decisions, how we understand our place in the cosmos. If you believe time is linear progress, you act differently than if you believe time is cyclic return. If you believe in eternal recurrence, you face the challenge Nietzsche posed. Would you affirm this exact life, with all its suffering and joy, if you had to live it again and again forever? Aion, the ancient god almost no one has heard of, continues to haunt our thinking about these fundamental questions. His symbols, the Zodiac wheel, the Ouroboros, the eternal youth who is also the ancient sage, remain powerful visual metaphors for ideas we still struggle to articulate fully. So what do we make of Aion? This god who was never as famous as Zeus or Athena, who confused even ancient writers, who existed at the intersection of myth, philosophy, religion, and cosmology. What is his significance for us? At the most basic level, Aion represents an attempt to understand time, not as an empty duration, but as a meaningful pattern, as cosmic principle, as divine reality. The ancients recognized that time isn't simple or straightforward. There's Chronos, the sequential time of events unfolding one after another. And there's Aion, the eternal time of cycles returning, of patterns repeating, of moments that somehow stand outside the temporal flow. We experience both these kinds of time. When we're caught up in daily activities, rushing from one thing to the next, living in Chronos, time feels linear, unforgiving, always slipping away. But in certain moments, in nature, in meditation, in love, in art, we touch something that feels eternal, where time seems to stop or expand, where we're fully present in a way that transcends past and future. Those moments partake of Aion. Aion also represents the human need to find pattern and meaning in existence. If time is just one random thing after another, if history is just meaningless chaos, if the cycles we observe in nature are just mechanical repetition without significance, then existence can feel absurd and meaningless. But if time follows patterns, if history cycles through ages each with its character and purpose, if the cosmos is ordered according to divine principles, then our lives participate in something larger and more meaningful than our individual mortality. The danger, of course, is that this can lead to fatalism. If everything is cycles, if everything that happens will happen again, if we're trapped on Aion's wheel, then why try to change anything? Why strive for progress or justice if it's all just going to cycle back eventually? This is the dark side of cyclic time. It can justify accepting the status quo, can drain urgency from moral action, and can make human effort seem futile. But there's another way to understand Aion cycles. The eternal return of patterns doesn't mean nothing changes. It means that fundamental patterns persist through all changes. Winter always returns, but each winter is unique. The pattern is eternal. The particulars are always new. And within the eternal patterns, human choice and action matter intensely. How you live this cycle, this iteration, this particular manifestation of the eternal pattern, that's where meaning and ethics live. The mystery religions understood this. They didn't teach passivity in the face of cosmic cycles. They taught active participation, conscious engagement, and spiritual transformation. Understanding Aion meant understanding the eternal patterns, yes, but it also meant learning to navigate those patterns skillfully, to align yourself with cosmic order rather than fighting against it, to achieve harmony with the eternal rather than being crushed by temporal existence. For modern people, Aion offers several valuable gifts. First, a reminder that time is more complex than our usual linear thinking acknowledges. Our culture tends to think only in terms of Chronos, progress, development, moving forward, getting things done. But Aion reminds us that cyclic time also matters. The seasons return. Generations repeat patterns. History rhymes even if it doesn't repeat exactly. Understanding these cycles can give us perspective and wisdom. Second, a way to think about eternity that isn't just endless time. Aion represents eternity as quality, not quantity, as a different mode of being, not just a really long duration. This opens up the possibility of touching eternity in the present moment, of experiencing timelessness within time, of finding the eternal now that mystics and contemplatives have always described. Third, powerful symbols for integrating time and eternity, change and permanence, mortality and immortality. The Ouroboros shows us that ending and beginning are one, that destruction feeds creation, that the cosmos sustains itself through transformation. The Zodiac will shows us that the cosmic order is both fixed and moving, eternal yet dynamic. Aion himself, young and old simultaneously, shows us that apparent opposites can be unified. Fourth, a theological heritage that understood divinity in sophisticated, non-anthropomorphic ways. Aion isn't a god who loves or hates, who rewards or punishes according to arbitrary will. He's a principle, a cosmic reality, the structure of existence itself. This kind of theology offers resources for people who find traditional theistic god concepts unsatisfying, but still want to engage with questions of ultimate reality, meaning, and transcendence. And finally, Aion reminds us that the questions ancient people asked about time, eternity, the nature of existence, how to live a meaningful life, what happens after death, whether there's an order to the cosmos, are still our questions. The specific answers we give might differ, but the fundamental human situation hasn't changed. We're still mortal beings trying to understand our place in an apparently infinite universe, still looking for patterns and meaning in existence, still wondering whether there's something eternal that transcends our temporal lives. 2,000 years ago, initiates descended into the underground Mithraeum, confronted the image of lion-headed Aion coiled with serpents within the Zodiac wheel, and sought understanding of eternal truth. Today, we don't have those rituals, those temples, that vivid mythological imagination. But we still seek understanding. We still ask the same ultimate questions. And the figure of Aion, ancient, paradoxical, eternal, still offers us symbols and concepts to think with as we grapple with time, mortality, and meaning. The God of eternity reminds us that while our individual lives are brief, we participate in patterns and realities that are eternal. The cycles continue. The Zodiac turns. The Ouroboros consumes and regenerates itself. And somewhere at the boundary between time and timelessness, holding the keys to the gates of heaven, stands Aion, ageless, eternal, forever young and forever ancient, the God who simply is, who has always been, who will always be, the endless now that contains all moments in its eternal embrace. If you've made it this far in our journey through the mysteries of Aion, thank you for investing your time, your Chronos, in exploring these eternal themes. If you found this fascinating, if you want to see more deep dives into ancient mythology, religion, and the big questions that humans have always asked, please hit that like button and subscribe. We've got so many more stories to tell, so many more mysteries to explore together. Drop a comment letting me know what aspect of Aion's story resonated most with you, or what other ancient deities you'd like to see covered in this kind of depth. Until next time, may you find moments of action within your Chronos. May you touch eternity in the eternal present, and may the wheel of time turn favorably for you in all its cycles. Take care, and I'll see you in the next